Good morning, Commissioner Mckelvey. Can we do a sound check, please?
Hi, sound check 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Great, thank you. Chair Robinson, can we do a sound check with you, please? Vice Chair De Laurentiis, can we do a sound check, please? Good morning, members. We do not have quorum at this time, so I'm going to need to complete a roll call. I will call each of your names. Just one moment, please. Commissioner Carroll.
Present, and when we're done the roll call, can I make a suggestion? Thanks.
Certainly. Vice Chair De Laurentiis.
Here.
Commissioner Bradford. Commissioner Lai. Commissioner Jagdeo. Commissioner Lalonde. I did just hear that there is a technical issue with one of our members. Just one moment, it's with Commissioner Bradford. The next call though is Commissioner Mckelvey.
Present.
Commissioner Minin Wong. Commissioner Osborne.
Present.
Sorry, just one moment. We're just working out something with Commissioner Bradford.
Recorders.
I believe Commissioner Bradford is here now. He's texted me to say so. Can you see him? Oh, there's
Commissioner
Denzel.
Minin Wong just joined.
Okay. Commissioner Bradford also thinks he's here. I don't see him.
He is not, but we did just get quorum.
Okay.
So we
All
can
right.
call the meeting to order. Oh, and
All right.
Commissioner Bradford is joining right now.
Okay. All right.
Looks like Commissioner Minin Wong just came here from the Arctic to give us quorum.
Okay.
We do have quorum, Chair.
Okay. We're going to get started.
I see Councillor Bradford. He's on the last frame.
Yeah, I'm
Oh.
here. Apologize, Madam Chair. I was not able to connect remotely, but I am now in the office.
Oh, awesome. Okay. That's great. So we are going to get started. I just want to clarify or ask Chris Ann, is there an echo or is it clean? Okay, great. I thought I heard one. Okay, I don't want to have an echo meeting again like we did once before. So welcome everyone to our last meeting of 2021. We do now have quorum, thankfully, and I'd ask the clerk to read the land acknowledgement.
Thank you, Chair. We acknowledge the land we are meeting on is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabeg, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. We also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit.
Thank you very much. Well read. As I always say at the beginning of every meeting, it's an open meeting. That's a reminder to everybody. And as we go through the agenda, submit requests for questions and to speak on items to the email address provided to you by the clerk. We have 5 minutes for questions and 5 minutes for speaking. And if you want to submit a motion, please email your motion to the email address provided. Technical issues, let us know and we'll try our best to help. So I'm going to go through the order paper, which is very short because this is a special board meeting focused on the TTC budget for the upcoming year 2022. So I just want to firstly ask item 1, which is the TTC's advertising contract. Would anybody like to hold that? And I'll just advise you that that's an in-camera item.
Madam Speaker,
Yes.
I have a question about it, but is every word in that report in camera? I hate us to go in camera. I have one question, and
Okay, let me just ask Commissioner Osborne also. She had her hand up.
Okay, sure.
I have a few questions that probably will need to go.
Okay, then that, you know what, then let's just go. Okay,
Cool.
so let's go into camera on item 1. And I'll just move that motion right now that the TTC Board Recess as a committee of the whole to consider confidential information contained in item 1 of the agenda related to a position plan, procedure, criteria, or instruction to be applied to any negotiations carried on or to be carried out by the TTC. I think Denzel's having audio issues. He's texting me, "Can you hear me?" And we cannot. Even though you're unmuted. You're unmuted, Denzel, but we can't hear you say and speak. Nice hat, though. So we're going to take 1 minute to just turn over into in camera.
The TTC virtual public meeting will resume shortly. The TTC virtual public meeting will resume shortly. The TTC virtual public meeting will resume shortly. The TTC virtual public meeting will resume shortly.
Members, we are live.
Thank you very much. We are back in public session. At this time on item 1, I'd ask that someone move a motion on the approvals made in camera. So that's Commissioner Gentleman and Wong is doing that. All in favor? Opposed? That carries. Okay, so item 2 and 3 have deputations and also presentations and deputations. So I held those both in my name. So we'll start with item 2. And I think we've got speakers, deputants standing by. Is that correct?
Correct, Chair. Our first speaker on item 2 is Alan Ewell. He is unmuted and will share his deck just one moment.
So this is
Hello there.
TTC Conventional Wheel-Trans Operating Budget. Welcome, Alan. Go ahead.
First slide. This deputation was originally written on December 21st, 2020. That's how predictable this budget was. Next slide, please. This is an election year budget, ergo no fare increase. Next slide, please. On January 10th, 2019, the current TTC board was told by Mr. Leary that the TTC's existing business model is increasingly unaffordable. Next slide, please. The political response to this warning from TTC staff was basically, thank you, sir, may I have another? Next slide, please. Based on the past dozen budget meetings, the common messaging from politicians is, woe is us if only the province would restore their funding to the TTC's operating budget. Next slide, please. Madam Chair, old people, please note that when the province cut its funding for the TTC's operating budget, next slide, our newest civilian board member was only 3 years old. Get over it. Provincial funding is not coming back. Next slide, please. This do-nothing budget does nothing to fix the fact that our monthly pass is 49 trips to break even. Remember, the Canadian average is 32 trips. Next slide, please. Earlier this year, the board was told that the Ontario average is 29 trips. Next slide, please. COVID is not an excuse for not fixing this budget or the 2020 or the 2021. This budget includes a $20.7 million draw from reserves. That draw needs to be paid back next year. $20.7 million would be about an 8-cent fare increase on Presto for next year after the election. Next slide, please. In May of this year, we looked at a report on our 5-year fare policy and 10-year fare collection outlook. In that report, it showed that York Region politicians funded 60% of the operating cost of their system, whereas the Toronto politicians only 37%. Next slide, please. I suspect we won't see that follow-up to this report until after next year's election. Next slide, please. After all, why would York Region politicians be willing to fund 50% of their 50% more of their transit system than Toronto politicians are? And why would Toronto politicians want Toronto voters to know that? Next slide, please. This TTC board and 24% of Toronto City Councillors, yet you can't fix a TTC budget. Next slide, please. The TTC is 50% of the city budget, it still can't fix the TTC budget. Next slide, please. So, Madam Chair, pardon my French, but why should I or anyone else vote for you if you can't fix the TTC's budget? Next slide, please. Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm now going to write my 2023 deputation for your replacements. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Any questions for the mover? I'm sorry, not the mover, for the deputant. Commissioner Carroll, go ahead.
So I just want to be clear. Is Alan aware that this is the first time we've deliberated on the budget?
Through the chair, we've talked about budgets for the past 3 years.
Yes, but the budget we're looking at currently, we received on Friday, and it had no prior briefing or deliberation over it. So, you know, we might not be able to fix it 100% with respect to the structural gap within it that has existed since 1995. But in terms of any fixes within this 2022 year, we're really just starting today. So I think we'd be given a little bit of time, couldn't we?
Through the chair, how many more years do you need? We've already done this since, like you said, 1995.
Right, and since
we
that
haven't
time, we've been
fixed it in this board. We haven't fixed it in the last board. Are we going to wait another 2 or 3 boards to do it?
Well, and as you
We
are
know
aware,
what's broken.
since
We need to get fixed.
Since 1995, that structural gap created by the province has continued by the province across multiple political parties, and we have continued in our intergovernmental strategy to articulate exactly what that structural gap is and to continue to ask for its resolution. Us and every other board. As you are aware, you are still aware of that, right?
I am aware that, through the chair, I'd say, why can York Region put 60% of the funding in, whereas your Toronto City politicians can only put 37% of the funding in? They don't get any more funding from the province than you do.
No, nor do they run a subway system or a streetcar system, which you are aware is more expensive to run.
Yes, I am aware of that, but their unit cost is higher than our unit cost per ride. So on the whole, it would probably averages probably out. We can't say that, you know, York Region doesn't run a subway, but Ottawa runs a subway, and their fare Metro Pass is 33 trips, and ours is 48. So they run 2 lines, we run 4 lines. Their size is a third of ours.
So if we zero in on the monthly pass, that's your key concern out of your presentation today. If we can adjust that's your key concerns.
That is my, through the chair again, that is my major key concern, because we are charging our people, our residents 48 trips. Ottawa charges 33.
Okay.
The provincial average being 29. That's where the biggest thing is. The per trip cost of $325, that's lower than the average. The monthly pass, and we want to get people on the system. And the only way we get the system on the system regularly is through a monthly pass that is affordable.
Right. Okay. I appreciate the clarification, because I thought by the end of the presentation you wanted me to fix the whole budget, including the structural gap. But the key concern would make the biggest difference. The key concern being the monthly pass. Thank you. Thanks for clarifying
that. Would be correct. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Other questions for the deputant? I see none, so we're going to move on. We have 6 other deputants. The next deputant's queued up. Chris Ann.
Thank you, Chair. The next deputant is Amrit Bath. Go ahead, Amrit.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you perfectly.
All right, thank you. Good morning, members of the TTC board. My name is Amrit Bath. I'm a student, an active community member from Malvern, and the project leader of a youth-based organization called Area Transit. I would like to thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak today. Today, I'm here to speak about the stories that youth have shared with me regarding how the TTC has impacted them in terms of fare rates increasing pre-COVID-19 and poor bus service. Many youth expressed that transit is slow, especially in winter, which caused youth to rely on a different mode of transportation. Along with slow transit came bus crowding and heavy delays, resulting in youth to be late to their exams, school, and work. Furthermore, the increases in fare rates resulted in students to skip meals, contribute to fare evasion, rely on their parents for money, and it pushed students to find jobs to be able to afford these expenses. Essentially, the list can go on. To further add, youth acknowledged the different ways in which these issues could be resolved, such as national and provincial subsidies, more bus stops and buses in service, accurate bus schedules, and so on. Youth also understood that issues like the pandemic, funding, time, technologies, and etc. could also be the challenges to advancing these solutions. Overall, I urge you to set a budget that will help improve TTC service and fare rates when considering these stories shared by youth. The budget should create a positive impact in the Malvern community and encourage youth to utilize transit. This issue matters to me because I can relate to the issues youth expressed personally as a student, and because holding discussions with youth helped me understand that much more work needs to be done to solve the challenges that we face. In conclusion, I recommend that you consider these stories of youth when creating the transit budget to overall help improve service and fare rates. We want to see more affordable rates and better service. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any questions for the deputant? Okay, thank you for your words today. We appreciate them. Next, Chrisanne.
Our next deputant is Daniel Bingham. Daniel, please go ahead.
Good morning. How are you? Merry Christmas. I want to start things off on a positive attitude because, you know, that's the way we get things done around here. You know, my name is Dan Bingham. I'm with the TTC Riders. I'm also sit on the steering committee of 3 other action groups that we are trying to support people, you know, that are having a hard time, you know, staying, you know, surviving today. So, you know, one of the things what the TTC Riders is asking for is to increase TTC service levels now. Cuts are unacceptable. At the last TTC board, TTC staff acknowledged that there were service reductions before the vaccine mandate came into effect. Some service cuts of November 2021 will be restored in the first quarter of 2022, but full restoration to normal levels will come by the second quarter, which is in June of 2022. This is way too late. The TTC has a $36 million operating surplus in 2021. TTC Riders think the surplus should be reinvested into more service this fall. TTC reduced service on 57 routes. Cuts include the 102 and the 47 keel, which were identified as crowded early in the pandemic by the TTC. In my own experience, I used to go to work on the 47 keel, and it has traditionally been really, you know, packed all the time. You're standing there waiting for 15 minutes, maybe sometimes a half an hour, and you see 3 or 4 buses go by that, you know, don't even stop. If you guys want to get the city back in gear, you want to get the city making money, right, you got to get people to work, and they got to know that, you know, they're going to be able to make their job appointments on time. I've had to turn down work because I can't depend on the TTC to get me to where I'm going on time, and I'm struggling for that. One more thing, TTC budget should plan for winning back riders. You know, one of the things, I worked social distancing for one of the companies, and we handed out masks. When people came up to the establishment, they didn't have any masks, we gave them one. There should be some kind of access for masks to the average citizen when boarding a TTC. I know the TTC drivers and all that don't want to handle it. Maybe we can make something, put in, I don't know, a receptacle or something that will, you know, people could just take their own. But we have to, if you want people to comply, you have to show them that you're willing to work with them. You guys do a fantastic job. Merry Christmas. Thank you for all your work.
Thank you very much. Any questions? No? Okay, we'll move on. Thank you again. Chris Ann.
Members, the next deputant is Lucy Drummond. Lucy, please go ahead. Lucy, please go ahead. Lucy, please go ahead. All right, it appears we may have an audio issue for our deputant, Lucy Drummond. We'll move on to the next deputant, Sheila Pisey Allen. Sheila, go ahead.
Hello, thanks for the opportunity to speak to you this morning. I wanted to speak today about why we need to budget now for a plan to win back riders and make sure that all the plans TTC is considering, like the 5-year fare policy, the ridership reacquisition strategy that's discussed in this budget, will be resourced. So, but I also wanted to first raise a couple questions about transparency and the lack of public debate we've seen about service reductions. We heard at the most recent Ttc board meeting that staff acknowledged service reductions were made before the vaccine mandate came into effect. And I quote, staff said, "The decision was made in light of ridership levels and our financial constraints to leave some of those vehicles unfilled." So we'd like to know, when was this decision made, to not run full service, and why were these decisions made without public debate at this board? The TTC has ended up with a surplus in 2021. Why wasn't that reinvested into increasing service in the fall? Because what we're seeing is riders reporting really outrageous wait times. I've heard about people waiting 45 minutes during a rush hour, buses disappearing from the schedule, probably to go fill gaps somewhere else. And we really need to budget for a plan that will win back riders. Commissioner Carroll said this is just the beginning, so that's great, because the ridership reacquisition strategy discussed in this budget, it's a great idea, but there's no funds to implement it. And we may need to adjust the current crowding standards so people feel more comfortable returning to transit. As commuting patterns change, we may need to boost service outside of traditional rush hours. So it's a great chance to reimagine who transit is for and improve trips for people who do shift work, take the TTC at night, use it for their groceries and get to school. And the Student Move TO survey has a lot of data about off-peak travel of students as well. Toronto City Council just approved Transform TO, which also recommends more service, but again, there's no plan to fund that this year. But this is the critical year where we need to reverse the downward spiral of ridership and win riders back. So that's why we'd like to see this budget for those improvements and increasing service, not just returning to the status quo. And finally, I just want to say that any plan to win back riders has to include a practical plan to promote mask use. We've seen, this has been an issue throughout the pandemic, but it's even more concerning right now with the latest variant. And the fact is, this is hurting the return of riders. I'm hearing from people that say, I don't feel safe because not everyone is wearing a mask. So we need a practical approach. We don't want an approach that targets racialized low-income riders. We know that the Toronto Ombudsman found that bylaw enforcement in parks did just that during the pandemic, but something needs to change. Hiring staff to hand out masks, to do education work, but this is something that is really hurting the return of riders. And lastly, we need to budget for fare policies as well that will win riders back. The TTC, we're so excited about the prospect of fare capping that is being considered in the 5-year fare policy. But unfortunately, that report has been delayed 3 times, and now it's being debated after this budget. So we'd like to see all of these measures properly resourced, because the TTC has the plans and the opportunity to win riders back. They need resourcing, and we need an honest conversation about what are the options and how much they will cost. Thank you.
Go ahead, Commissioner Carroll.
Thanks. Hi, Sheila. I don't know if you heard the first deputant, in terms of zeroing in on a change that we could make in the budget. Mr. Yule was asking us to really consider making an adjustment to the cost of a monthly pass. I wonder if you've looked at that in the context of what you're asking us for, which is to resource ridership growth. Would adjusting the monthly pass while we have depressed ridership like this makes the cost of doing so kind of neutral? Because in depressed ridership, if you get any extra rides by doing the monthly pass, you're ahead of the game. Would you consider that ridership growth and worth adjusting in this budget?
Definitely, and I know that there's a few fare capping options that might be considered in the 5-year fare policy. So it could be weekly fare capping, daily fare capping as well, but also, as the first deputant mentioned, reducing the cost of the monthly pass, because Toronto has one of the highest, rates. You need to tap however many times, but it's much higher than other transit agencies in Canada. So it's discouraging people from purchasing a monthly pass. Weekly, daily fare capping are also great options.
Yeah, and I don't want to usurp all the work that's going on in the 5-year fare strategy. So one that's just simple and lean seems like if we could just change that number of trips needed to pay for your monthly pass, then all these other creative options could still be reported out in the 5-year fare strategy. Would that help in terms of your membership?
Absolutely, and we also know that the existing discount on the fare pass, the low income discount, is far too much. So we need to make sure that we're reducing fares for people who can't afford TTC the most, but also reducing it for everyone to drive ridership. People aren't going to be purchasing a monthly pass, and there's many people in Toronto who could never afford to purchase a monthly pass and still can't afford to purchase the fare pass. So any fare reductions are going to be welcome, especially for people that can't afford transit the most. And the ridership data shows that people who use the fare pass have been keeping using transit more than other people during the pandemic.
Right. Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much for your presentation today. We're going to move to our next speaker.
Thank you, Chair. We're going to go back to Lucy Drummond. Lucy, please go ahead.
Hi. Hello, good morning. Can people hear me? Hello?
Yes, we can hear you perfectly. Go ahead. We can hear you if you could proceed. Hello?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Go ahead.
Okay, great. All right. Like I was saying, happy holidays, everybody. I totally support a reduction in the fare pass. Like it's been mentioned, that many people are struggling to maintain paying their rent and purchasing food, knowing that the cost of living is going up. I also understand that living in Etobicoke, I know that there's some proposed cuts within the bus routes on Evans and Royal York. We've had real issues with also crowding at buses. We've had empty buses go by with crowded buses. This is a real issue in regards to feeling comfortable taking the TTC. I understood that hearing that there was a $36 million surplus with the TTC. I think it's also important to also bring on more supervisors to sort of maintain the traffic flow, because I think traffic in Toronto is becoming a real problem. But in terms of managing traffic control, people coming on the buses, wanting to feel safe during the pandemic. So that's pretty much what I wanted to say. I think I support the reduction in the transit pass. I think it's important to do more to make people feel safe going on TTC and making sure that they get to the destinations on time, and especially tackling traffic. That's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Any questions? Thank you. We've got one more speaker. Chrisanne?
Thank you, Chair. The final deputant of the day is Abigail Doris. Abigail, please go ahead.
Hello, are you able to hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Can you hear us?
Oh, fantastic. I can, absolutely.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Excellent. Thanks so much. Good morning, everyone. My name's Abby Doris. I'm a registered early childhood educator, and I'm the executive coordinator for the Toronto Community for Better Child Care. Thank you for the opportunity to speak this morning. I'm here to share stories and concerns of frontline child care workers and families around reduced transit services and overcrowding on buses. Child care workers work with the most vulnerable citizens in our city, young children ages 0 to 4 who don't have access to COVID vaccinations, nor are they able to wear masks or have the understanding of social or physical distancing. But they do require intimate care and close contact care, and we're doing our very best to keep children safe and to mitigate the spread of COVID in child care centers across Toronto, yet it's becoming increasingly challenging with new variants that are more infectious. So many child care workers, myself included, rely on accessible transit services to be able to do the critical community care work we do. We need transit to be safe so that we can keep children safe. Overcrowding and reduced services put us all at risk. So I'd like to take this opportunity this morning to share some stories. An early childhood educator shared the reduced bus services have made my 10-hour workday into a 13 to 14-hour workday. I'm a single mom, and having to wait longer for overcrowded buses means that I don't get to spend time with my kids, and I'm putting them at risk for COVID. We need more buses. A nonprofit childcare operator shared, of my 15 staff, 12 rely on public transit, as do the majority of the families we work with. When transit is late, it impacts our entire community. If a worker is late in the morning, we can't let children into the program, so families aren't able to go to work. If a parent is late at the end of the day, we have to charge a late fee that after 5 minutes is $5 a minute. Families don't have the funds for that. If a parent's 45 minutes late to an hour late for pickup, we have to call Children's Services. Imagine all of this because of reduced transit services. This could be devastating for a family. We need to expand transit services now. And these stories aren't unique in any way. Families and workers alike from all of our Toronto communities so heavily rely on having accessible transit. And I urge you to be bold in this coming budget, which I realize you've just gotten on Friday. It's just in your hands. But with a $36 million operating surplus in 2021, this would have been an opportunity to reinvest into more services this fall. As the 2022 budget quickly approaches, families are depending on you to prioritize getting services back to pre-pandemic levels. It will be these increased services that'll win back our riders. The TTC reduced services on 57 routes, and our frontline workers and families are living the consequences of this. We need increased services levels now, especially during a pandemic, which we definitely haven't finished yet. With that, we also need you to adjust crowding standards and boost service outside of traditional rush hours. This is really important for our families and our frontline workers. We need to see this in your funding plan for 2022. And it's great that City Council approves Transform TO strategy to get to net zero, which recommends more buses and streetcar services. So I really, really urge you to please be bold and ensure that the services are increased in the 2022 budget. Families, children, and frontline workers are depending on you. Thanks for your time.
Thank you very much. Any questions? You have a question. Commissioner Carroll.
Yes, good morning. This is kind of new for us. We haven't had a Coalition for Better Childcare deputation. Is that because is it that you have a particular interest in transit and you're part of it now, or is this situation that we're affecting the child care day more pronounced than it's ever been before?
Yeah, yes, that's what it is. That's where the crossover is. I keep hearing from child care workers that they're facing specific issues when it comes to overcrowding on buses, and they're facing other issues where buses aren't turning up, so they're late for work, and it impacts the entire childcare community.
Yeah. Even last year, where the the COVID impacts were very much embedded in the TTC budget. We didn't hear from you folks. So it's a matter of, as we've been reducing services this year to try and spread out the help we're getting from the other orders of government, trying to spread out those revenues, here you are. And so, you know, we've got to adjust that strategy is what you're saying. We've gone a little too far is what you're saying.
Yeah, anything that we can do to help support families and frontline workers, not only in childcare, but I'm thinking of all frontline care workers that depend on transit for sure. Anything that we can do in this upcoming budget to reduce fare, to increase services, will have a huge impact on our entire city.
Okay, thank you so much for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I just want to clarify that this budget was made public on Monday, December 13th, not last Friday. So that's been said a couple times. That's inaccurate. It was made public Monday, December 13th. We're now going to move to the CEO, Rick Leary, for some opening comments, and then to the budget presentation by our CFO, Josie Levita. So over to you, Rick.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to say good morning to everyone and season's greetings as well. You know, I want to welcome back our YouTube viewers and today's participants to the special board meeting to address the TTC's proposed 2022 budgets. Now, before I turn it over to Josie Levita, our Chief Financial Officer, who's going to walk us through the proposed 2022 TTC and Wheel-Trans operating budget, as well as the 2022 to 2031 capital budget and plan, I'd like to just make a few remarks. Commissioners, that we believe that the budget before you today is not only good news for our current ridership, but for future TTC customers. For the year ahead, our proposed operating budget recommends freezing fares for the second consecutive year to provide some financial relief to our customers through the ongoing pandemic. More specifically, the proposed $2.24 billion operating budget for both conventional and Wheel-Trans services will fund the restoration of service to 100% of pre-pandemic levels on our conventional system should the ridership and the demand come back. We've also budgeted for new and enhanced TTC programs. This proposed budget is designed to make the TTC more modern and more welcoming and inclusive. The 2022 budget is also funding a number of things which I'll mention. It funds the TTC operations of Line 5, the Eglinton Crosstown LRT, in late 2022, and preparation for Line 6, the Finch West LRT, opening in 2023. It will increase Wheel-Trans service to approximately 65 to 70% of pre-pandemic levels. It'll help us with our service plan reset and our ridership reacquisition strategy, as well as for the completion of the 10-year fare collection strategy, all while continuing to build on our diversity, anti-Black racism, and mental health training. The TTC is also seeking approval for the proposed 2022-2031 capital budget and plan. Now, on the capital side, we're recommending a budget that continues laying the foundation for the future needs of our transit customers in the city and the surrounding regions for decades to come. We can achieve this through major capacity enhancements, and fleet procurement projects, all the while ensuring that the majority of the budget is invested in the state of good repair on existing assets. And that means fixing what we have while building for the future. Now, the 2022 portion of the $12 billion capital plan is approximately $1.7 billion. And just a few of the highlights for 22, you know, this funding will help us meet our legislative requirements, including making the system fully accessible by 2025. It's helping us to advance delivery on new accessible fleet purchases, such as the 60 streetcars, the 300 hybrid buses, and 300 all battery electric buses, as well as 70 new Wheel-Trans vehicles, all while helping us continue to work on major capacity improvement projects, such as the Young and Bloor expansion and the re-signaling of lines 1 and 2. Now, the capital budget report also updates the TTC's 15-year, $37 billion capital investment plan and introduces the TTC's very first real estate investment plan, a 15-year strategic roadmap that supports the capital investment plan. And this is very critical as we continue to work with CreateTO and the city's real estate department to ensure that we have proper coordinated planning and, more importantly, proper financial planning as well. I do want to thank Pam Kraft and her team for all the work she's done working with the city and CreateTO and getting us to this point to be better program for planning. Now, with these budgets, we're protecting services and staying the course in terms of our corporate plan goals. We're going to continue to provide safe, seamless, and reliable transit service, to be an inclusive and accessible service provider, while we strive for financial sustainability and we innovate for future demand. I'll let you know that I am proud to tell you that TTC employees are a resilient group of people, highly dedicated to building, operating, and maintaining world-class transit system for the citizens of Toronto and beyond. So with that, Josie, I'm going to turn it over to you for the presentation, if you would. Thank you, Chair, and I'll talk after Josie does the presentation.
Good morning, Chair, members of the board, and our viewing public, and thank you, Rick. So on behalf of our CEO, Rick Leary, and our entire TTC team, I'll be presenting an overview of our 22 operating budget that's before you for your approval today. Next slide, please. So as our CEO mentioned, and at the highest level, our 22 operating budget does keep the TTC affordable. There is no fare increase being recommended again for a second year in a row. And again, as the CEO outlined, restores pre-pandemic service capacity in Q2 22. It also readies us for Line 5 operation in the late fall and allows us to prepare for Finch West in 2023. This budget incorporates $25 million in efficiency savings with no service impact. And finally, it does continue to include a financial impact from the COVID-19 pandemic, totaling $461 million at this time. And we do continue to meet and discuss with the city staff and the province on how to secure the required funding. Next slide, please. So as noted earlier, and in previous budgets, these service objectives and outcomes were established to help deliver on our corporate plan's key pillars. And once again, they have guided the development of our 22 budget generally and have been used to set our priorities for allocating our resources more specifically. Next slide, please. So before we review our 22 operating budget, I would like first to revisit our 21 financial plan and experience, as these two laid the foundation for our 22 budget. As a reminder, our 21 financial plan was built on a budget that provided demand responsive service, where we preserved priority service and moved buses on key routes as demand required. We delivered on customer and safety and employee safety as part of our COVID response, and our ridership was forecasted to return up to a gradual value of about 49% of pre-COVID normals by year-end 2021. Additionally, funds were provided to allow us to advance on new priorities that helped move us forward with our goals around accessibility, diversity, and reliability. Next slide. So when we look to our experience, despite our continued service and financial impact, the TTC made significant progress on our key priorities. With respect to improving our transit reliability, we did open McNichol Garage and improved garage operations and reduced non-revenue driving time, successfully implemented the planned vehicle maintenance activities that were funded in 21, with all vehicle reliability metrics and targets being met or exceeded. We eliminated the need to have 20 to 30 future weekend subway closures and avoided 2 years of bypassing station platforms by completing 44,000 feet of asbestos abatements, which overall improved our safety and reliability. And finally, as the CEO also mentioned, the board approved the procurement of 60 zero-emission streetcars and upgrades to the Hillcrest storage facility, which both support our reliability objectives as well as our resiliency ones. We enhanced our accessibility with making our 53rd station accessible in 2021 and continued work on the additional 19 that's yet to go. We reduced Wheel-Trans call wait time down to 2 minutes in September of 21. And finally, we overachieved our gender recruitment target of 40% of new women operator hires by 23%. Next slide, please. We advanced on our resiliency goals, and we introduced a Wi-Fi pilot on the 35 Jane and 102 Markham Road bus routes. This innovation, along with establishing our new innovation and sustainability function in 21, will help set the course for the future. Finally, given our priority on sound fiscal management, we had a series of accomplishments that are noted here. We implemented second sourcing initiatives for the McNichol Garage facility maintenance and streetcar cleaning, concluded our agreement with Metrolinx, which included a financial settlement and a framework for moving forward. We completed implementation of 72 Auditor General recommendations and continued the implementation of series of these initiatives that you will see savings in this budget for. We reduced our overall overtime costs. And again, what you will see as part of this commitment is $5.1 million of savings in the 22 budget. And finally, we commenced planning work to support the implementation of modern TO to rationalize our office space as part of the overall contribution to the city's efforts. And in this budget, we are requesting funding to keep it moving. Next slide, please. Our pandemic response in 21 continued all the safety measures that we implemented. However, we did augment our response with the installation of HEPA 13 filters in all our vehicles to ensure that our air quality was sound. We introduced real-time bus passenger counts on our to our Rocket and Rocketman transit apps, and we actively monitored bus capacity. We did, in fact, distribute more than 2 million masks across the system, and for our customers, and we delivered 9,400 vaccines at TTC stations and facilities for our staff. And finally, in support of city efforts, we provided ride vouchers and shuttles to vaccine clinics. Next slide, please. From a budgetary or funding perspective, we identified COVID impacts of almost $800 million as outlined in the bar above. As you recall, we also had confirmed that we had funding at the time, this time last year, of $232.4 million from Safe Restart funding. And subsequently, we're able to confirm an additional $395 million, bringing that to $600 and almost $28 million of additional funding in 2021. We also contributed management savings of $65.5 million towards supporting and funding this gap. And then finally, in the latest discussions that we've had with the province, we are anticipating that we will receive another $103 million that will bring the total amount of funding to $796 million. So when we combine what we received in 2020 as well as 2021, we're anticipating to receive a total of almost $1.4 billion out of the total SRA funding envelope of $2 billion province-wide. Next slide, please. Our passenger revenue budget was set on the basis of our Q4 2020 experience, and we forecasted our revenue by quarter as laid out in the table to the right. We continue to monitor our revenue daily and review our trends. And as you can see from the black line on this graph, that set our budget, and the red line reflects our experience. Our largest impact of our revenue loss was during the stay-at-home order periods that were in the first half of the year. But since the Step 3 reopening on July 16th, passenger revenue has been broadly consistent with levels anticipated in the 21 budget, and in fact, at this point, has exceeded our projections at roughly 51%. Next slide. Both ridership, as measured by the location of fare payment, or kind of the end-to-end journey, as well as boardings by mode, were monitored throughout the year. You can see through this chart, separately, we have the experience that we have seen on bus, streetcar, and subway. We saw gradual ridership gradually returning across all modes. And we match service to demand and adjust accordingly with the goal to meet the board's commitment that when we reached 50% ridership demand, we would move to 100% of service. Next slide. And finally, we also monitored bus capacity on all our buses. And with stage 3 reopening, we adjusted our service accordingly. All of these experiences were inputs into the development of the 22 operating budget. Next slide. So with this backdrop, I'd like to now provide you with an overview of the 22 operating budget and our outlook for 23 and 24. Next slide, please. So based on our service priorities, we have identified the key initiatives that this budget, as well as our capital, have for 2022. So we continue in terms of ensuring that we have seamless and reliable transit. We continue to match service to demand, but are moving to 100% of service, as noted earlier, in Q2 2022. And we're building on our vehicle maintenance capacity as 365 buses are coming out of warranty. Given our commitment to our fiscal situation, you will see that we are continuing our business transformation, and a lot of the priority initiatives are actually reflective from 2021 in this budget, and we continue to work on these in 2022. I would like to note that the Ridership Reacquisition strategy, which is built into this budget, is actually funded. There is a request for $500,000, and it is being funded out of our surplus funds as a way to ensure that this can move forward and prepare us for the future. We have also ensured that we could continue to focus on a lot of our accessibility initiatives. So this budget, as noted earlier, freezes TTC fares, but it also requests new funding to further our work on diversity and inclusion, as well as ensuring that we have the training and awareness in place for our ability to move forward. Next, please. And finally, this budget advances our work on service integration, prepares us for new service, and in fact also ensures that we have funding aside to start our innovation and sustainability work and our next stages of our fare collection strategy. Next slide, please. And so now for the numbers. So when you look at our 22 operating budget, our base budget increase for 2022 is $59.4 million, as circled there in the second column to the left. In addition, we're requesting $2.1 million net for new enhanced services, bringing the total increase over 2021 budget to $61.5 million, or a 7.8% increase. This budget also reflects the efficiency savings and balancing actions of $38.6 million, as well as the COVID impact of the $461.2 million, as noted in the recommended budget column, which is $335 million below last year's impact. Next slide. So most of the $61.5 million increase in funding is really driven by unavoidable pressures. We'll see that 25 of that is essentially attributable to the cost of the 22 cost of operating the Eglinton Crosstown service. An additional $17 million required to restore pre-pandemic service capacity. Our fuel price increase, given the volatility of the market, as well as our legislative impacts, requires an additional $18 million. And finally, our new enhanced requests on a net basis is $2.1 million. Next slide, please. So line 5, expected to open in late 22, of course, is a new service that will be operated and maintained by the TTC. It extends 19 kilometers. It has 15 stations and 10 surface stops, and has over 66 connections throughout the system. The $25 million that's required in 22 will require an additional $33 million in 23 for the full operation. And so in total, the cost to run and to operate and maintain this new service will be $63 million. Next slide. This budget also provides funding to restore TTC conventional service capacity. So this chart out to the left shows you what the proposed service would be based on meeting the Ttc board policy of once we reach 50% demand, we would restore to 100% of service. So on this basis, the budget would be 100% across all, budget for buses would be 100% across all 4 quarters of the year, while streetcar and subway would be set at 95%, restoring to 100% for the balance of the year. When we now take into account our available workforce, our Q1 numbers have been adjusted accordingly. So instead of 100% for bus across all 4 quarters, this budget now reflects a service of 94.3% of pre-COVID levels for Q1, for streetcar at 90.4% and subway at 90%. And in all cases, restoring to 100% in Q2 of 2022. This is primarily due to the implementation of the mandatory vaccine policy that required some temporary service adjustments due to operator availability. But with the acceleration of hiring, we believe that we will be at 100% of pre-pandemic service on all modes in Q2 2022. Next slide. As mentioned earlier, Wheel-Trans will also be restoring its service, and it's based again, as conventional, looking at our year-end experience and calibrating that up based on actual demand. So for 2022, we're anticipating 2.7 million rides. That aligns with the forecasted demand, which sees us moving from 57 in Q1 of 21, 57 of pre-COVID levels in Q1 of 2022, up to 75 or 73% of pre-normal levels at the end of Q4, or an average of 65%. Next slide, please. The 22 operating budget includes $25.6 million in savings arising from the implementation of several efficiency measures, and 13.1 in balancing actions to address essentially volatile expenses. All other base pressures to sustain our service have been offset with these measures. I would be remiss if I didn't have this chart in front of you. It is clearer on page 24 of the report, but I believe it's important that we spend a few moments to look and to emphasize the numerous initiatives that the TTC have undertaken to achieve these results. So at the top group, we see a series of reviews that, based on our experience, as well as looking at how best to manage or mitigate the impact on diesel fuel prices, we have identified $11 million in savings for 2021. In the next grouping, you will see that we have a series of efficiency measures that have been taken across the system. The first 2 lines being the results of our overtime reduction management strategy that will result in the combined amount of $5.1 million, just the first 2 lines there. We have improved vehicle work methods. We've looked at a series of our contracts. And as well, we also have the results of the implementation of our one-person train operation that will provide us an additional $2.6 million in savings and a reduction of 66 positions, and that is after being able to reinvest in providing more station supervisors in the system. We continue through with our business transformation program, which together is providing $900,000 in additional savings. That's through the second sourcing we identified earlier, as well as a review of our store persons and the continuation of our family of services. The work that we are partnering with on the Auditor General continues to see results there of approximately $2.3 million as those recommendations continue to be implemented over time and accrue more efficiencies. And finally, we have identified some balancing strategies to help mitigate against the volatility of prices. And so in the first place, we are looking to draw upon $8.5 million for fuel prices only if it's required. So while we have included a base amount, as noted earlier, we are suggesting that an additional amount be funded through the stabilization reserve should those prices continue to be seen at current day prices. And finally, we're also recommending that we draw an additional 1.9 million in terms of looking at our insurance premiums as well as any accident claims that may also arise. In all these cases, because of the volatility, we are recommending this strategy. Next slide, please. And so our new and enhanced service priorities for 2022 are essentially focused on key outcomes that we are intended to achieve. And we've identified those initiatives that we believe will have the most impact in achieving them. So to begin, there is $700,000 being requested to add 2 instructors dedicated to diversity and anti-racism training for frontline staff. This is to deliver specialized mental health, diversity, inclusion training consistent with the Ombudsman Toronto recommendations, and to be able to bolster awareness campaigns throughout the year. Our next request here is the service plan reset and ridership reacquisition strategy. This has a cost of $500,000, but we are funding it from our reserve as a time-limited expense. And this is to examine changes in post-pandemic travel patterns, examine how riders can be innovatively attracted back to the TTC. Our fare collection strategy at a cost of $600,000, but also funded from the reserve, is to help us develop our business case and establish our business terms as we think about future collection our future collection strategy needs. Our innovation and sustainability function has a request of $400,000, and that is to embed environmental sustainability and climate change resilience at the TTC. Our first step there is to establish a strategy and plan, and also to produce an independent assessment report as a first step. And then finally, as we continue to partner with the city on Modern GO, we are requesting $1.1 million there. That includes expertise and capacity to continue with project management, space planning, and information requirements that are all required to support and get us to meeting the objectives and deadlines. So this finalizes our overview of the expenditure side of the budget, and now I'd like to focus on the revenues. Next slide, please. So in order to establish our budget for 22, we examined various ridership trends to model our projections for 22 and beyond. To start, we examined our riders' frequency of usage. So what we see on this slide, firstly, is to the left, is the proportionate use of our system based on the pre-COVID experience. So looking to the bottom group, which is the black bar there, what we can see is that the highest proportion of usage by infrequent riders, which is the 1 to 4 times per week, and our occasional users, which is the red bar, which is 5 to 6 times per week. That proportion declines, but the proportionate decline is the steepest amongst our frequent riders, with the least recovery from the frequent riders, which are 9+, which is the orange group, and those that are using the period pass months, which is the purple bar. Next slide, please. We also examined revenue ridership by user group to assess usage and the factors impacting that usage. Our greatest loss is from adult riders, mainly driven by reduced working or commuting trips and less leisure travel at 37%. The next largest group is our youth and post-secondary, and that's primarily as a result of the continuation of virtual learning throughout 2021, and again, reduced leisure travel. And then finally, our seniors are the lowest level of loss there, and that is also due to reduced leisure. In summary, we have more infrequent riders using the system, and that's mainly driven by the continuation of working from home. virtual learning, and less leisure social travel during the health restrictions. These factors and trends from 2021 were used as a basis for helping to determine both service demand and ridership revenue. Next slide. So from a demand perspective, you saw this, I believe, in your September board meeting. This was established and presented to the board to take into account the key variables that were that we've just talked about and establish both a high and a low range. The red line, the solid red line represents the ridership budget, the revenue ridership budget for 2022, and the dashed line is the forecast for 2023. So 2022 is based on both our 21 year-end experience, that percentage, which essentially is at around 51% now, our user frequency insights, as well as the service demand forecast service data on return to office plans, as well as the broader return to in-person learning at post-secondary and the assumptions around returning to special events and leisure and social travel. So as a result, our revenue ridership budget's been set at 54% in January, rising to 50% by the end of Q1 and reaching 80% by year end. There is also a marginal increase in 2023, but given the expected continuation of the hybrid work model, we see that extrapolating out to about 85%. This is directional, of course, and will continue to be modeled as more experience is provided. Next slide. So this just breaks down the details of that revenue budget for revenue ridership budget for 2022. So what we are projecting here is rides of 369.4 million, which represents 69.4% of pre-COVID normal, and revenue of $845.9 million, which is 67.7% pre-COVID experience. By period, you can see the graduation of that, and to your right, you can see the recovery by concession, which each of the groups have been identified, noting that the black bar, which represents adults, will not grow quite as high as the others, given the expectation that return to office reaches an average of 1.7 days per week, as determined by our survey results. Next slide. So as a result, our COVID impact for 2022 is set at 461 million and highly dependent on the anticipated ridership recovery. 84% of that number is the loss in passenger revenue, net of Presto fees, of course, representing 387 million. The loss of ancillary revenue of 22 or almost 23 million, of course, the ongoing costs to continue with our COVID safety measures. To date, as you know, we have received, as I mentioned earlier, significant support, and we're continuing to work with the city and the province on securing funding for 2022 and beyond. Next slide, please. So looking forward, we see that some key factors in 2023 include the full cost of operating Line 5, as I had indicated earlier, as well as the opening of Line 6. And while they will provide an opportunity to expand our transit network and grow ridership, it also comes at a cost of about 56 million in 2023. And the full restoration of service will require an additional 19 million. And right now, our inflationary increases are projected at 27 million, resulting in 125 million for 23 and up to about 59 million at this point in 2024. In all cases, it does speak to the need to help sustain ongoing and stable funding. Next slide, please. So when we take what we just saw and combine it with our potential COVID impact, we're identifying an additional pressure of 250 million in 2023 and an additional 176 million in 2024, combining that a value to being a total of 375 million in 23 and 235. We do see the lingering impact of COVID-19 through 2024, and subject to, of course, our continued ridership reacquisition. That is work that will be undertaken in 2022 in preparation for 23. So this concludes our presentation on the R22 operating budget, and happy to take questions from the board that you may have. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that comprehensive presentation. We do have questions for you. The first is Commissioner Carroll.
Oh, thanks, Madam Chair. I have a bunch of questions. I hope I can fit them into 5 minutes. And thank you for mentioning that. I should clarify. I'm sorry. Yes, the public did get the agenda earlier. For the councillor members, my head was in council session until Friday. So in any case, just a quick question, read the deputants. How many monthly passes are we selling these days? My clock is ticking.
Sorry, I'm just getting that information. 1 second, sorry, Councillor.
Can we stop my clock while
Yeah,
I'm not
sure.
getting an answer?
I have it. Yeah. Sorry, can you ask your next question? I'll just have to put my hands on that.
Okay, so I'll move to the savings efficiencies on well, the chart of them's on 19 of the presentation. Overtime, who in the main makes overtime? Where did the overtime costs that we do incur go? Is it mostly the operators, mostly the head office?
So through the chair, I will start that answer. Many of them outside of scheduled scheduled overtime as part of our service delivery is really dispersed throughout. However, we do see overtime through many of our frontline functions, whether it's with work that's being done in our capital delivery, whether it's work that's being done through our transit and fare areas, but quite frankly, we have taken a broad-based approach right across the system to look at all overtime and how we could do things differently.
So the reduction, the 3.8 we hope to reduce here, that's going to be that's in the conventional system. That would include the overtime that's baked into operators' schedules. You're going to try to reduce there.
So through the chair, no, that overtime is part of our schedule. So that's, to the extent that we can look at different ways of doing it, but we have to account for overtime there.
Okay. And for an operator, if they're incurring overtime, it's once they've got a bus. If their shift is sitting in the spare board, they're just going to sit there for a regular shift. They're not on overtime if they're having a spare board day. Am I right about that?
I'll ask Jim to answer that, or Kirsten, please.
Through the chair, that is, I believe you're correct, Councillor, Commissioner. Your question was, if somebody is on spare board, are they on straight time or on overtime? And the answer is that they are generally on straight time, except in extraordinary cases where we may supplement that spare board, anticipating a greater number of absences. For example, on a snowstorm day, we may bring additional resources in on overtime that would join the spare board, but they would be quickly deployed out to provide service.
So that's what I'm trying to get at here, and where we go looking for efficiencies, because, looking at some of the complaining on social media that's going on, it just is, and we're able to read it. Hear operators complaining, why are there twice as many of us as usual in spare board? There are buses. Why can't I get on one and get out there and start driving it? And then things would be less crowded. So when I see, overtime reduction is the strategy to balance the budget in 2022, how do I know that that's not the strategy? To just leave people sitting in spare board and go home after their straight time is finished. And that in the end is a service reduction. We're trying to reduce overtime by having them just go home from the spare board on straight time, not give them a bus. And now we've got a crowded bus. Is the plan to achieve this much, almost $4 million in overtime reduction? It does not include that overtime that is a part of the regular service schedule, or does not include it now, and later in the year you're going to start using that strategy again? Just trying to figure it out.
Through the chair, I'm not sure I caught the question at the end, Commissioner, but in response to, I think, your earlier question with respect to spare board utilization and increasing the size of spare boards to decrease overtime, this is a balance that happens, it constantly happens, and we are always trying to balance the right amount of spare board. Our spare board utilization is 100%. Every single operator on the spare board is used and has been used for several years at this point. So that is not, in general terms, that is not an overtime reduction strategy. We have seen slight increases in our spare board, and that is as a result of the lead time required to schedule service levels with respect to changes in the workforce and workforce availability. And we're continuing to try to balance that, but not knowing how many operators I'm going to have 2 months away and having to provide a schedule for that requires some flexibility in the size of the spare boards.
Okay. The reason I ask is what I'm trying to get at here is, are these really non-service efficiency measures, or is there a service impact of some kind? When you start to reduce overtime, but overtime is really baked into how we deliver our service level, that's all I'm trying to get at there is, are these truly non-service efficiencies? Because if that were the case, I can live with them.
So through the chair, I'll try and answer this question. So as we looked at this, we looked at situations where overtime may have been incurred in previous years because there had been vacancies, and now they're ramping up, and so the overtime can come down. We have looked at adding positions to build up the capacity so we can reduce the overtime, right? So these are truly strategies that we're looking at how we do work differently and think about it. In some cases, we've done some changes to schedules so that the work is being done on overtime, but on direct shifts. So we've adjusted the work delivery approach. So in my view, they would truly be called efficiencies.
Okay. I don't think I have time for my line of questioning, Madam Chair, on the monthly pass. So maybe there'll be a second round, but I would like at least the answer to that first question.
I do.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. So if we could get Commissioner Carroll and answer her original question.
So through the
we're
chair,
going to move on to Commissioner Osborne.
Sorry, are we doing the answer to Commissioner Carroll first, or do I go?
No, they're looking it up. So you go ahead.
I think I heard Miss Levita say she has it. It's just a number.
Oh, I didn't hear that. Sorry. Go ahead, Josie.
Yeah, so through the chair, I do have that number. So the passes that were sold for December sits at 68,392. And we've seen a rise in the last 3 months around the 66,000, 70,000. But earlier on in the year, they were up to about 200,000.
Right. Okay, thank you so much.
Okay, thank you. Let's go ahead with Commissioner Osborne.
Okay, thanks, Madam Chair, and also thanks to everybody who was involved in this. These budgets are absolutely monumental. And I noted that we did get the budget a week ago Friday, during which time things have gotten a bit scary around here. And I'm wondering, because given the lead time to produce these numbers, how comfortable we are with ridership projections and what the sensitivity is. Our CFO alluded to this, that, you know, obviously revenue is just inextricably linked to ridership. And knowing what we know about Omicron and the way things are already starting to tighten, how we feel about these at least early Q1, Q2 numbers. And secondly, what the sensitivity is if we're off. I know you did this last year. If we're off by 1% on ridership, what's the fallout on the bottom line?
So thank you for that question. And through the chair, essentially our sensitivity about 1% is about $12 million. And you know, you're correct in saying that we just finished drawing the ink on this when the Omicron thing cases started to climb. And so the sensitivity that we see, of course, is just depending on how quickly the cases come up and come down in kind of the January, February area period. And so we will continue to monitor this situation. So if the scenario is such that the January ridership is estimated to be more like what we saw in September, sort of prior to return to school. You know, it could be as much as 1 million rides lower per week. But if the recovery is pretty quick and recommences it as early as February, you know, we could still see a bit of a budget impact. If it's longer, i.e. to the end of Q1, we could see a more significant increase. We are in conversations with the city in discussing whether we adjust this at all, but we will monitor this. And like last year, if we need to pull back, we will pull back, but we will record whatever COVID impacts we have, then that will be submitted as part of our SRA funding. So I think really the time will tell through our January experience where we see this trajectory going.
Thank you. That's all I have.
Is there any other questions? I have a couple. I just wanted to ask about the fare strategy. When will we have that update, and I guess eventually the final report on the fare strategy? Because there's been a few questions about that related to fare passes, etc. So could you just update us on that, please?
Through the chair, I'll ask that question. So we intend to provide an update to this board in February of 2022. And then with the final recommendations, which will include recommendations around the future of fare passes and other recommended products, will come to this board in May of 2022.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you very much. I just want to ask about also full service. So we're returning to full service, although that may be impacted by this new variant. Again, shocking to all of us that we're back in this position, not just the TTC, but the whole city. Everybody's heads are spinning. But I guess I wanted to ask, you know, my understanding is we're talking about returning to full service, but my understanding is there's some days we've hit up to 96% full service, even though ridership's at 50%. So could somebody elaborate on that? So we just clear up the record on the fact that we've almost been, I believe, almost at full service. So could I have someone speak on that? Could I ask someone to?
Through you, Chair, I'll jump in this, and I'm going to ask staff if they could just review the latest numbers for us. Every morning at 7 o'clock, we do an overview of where we are with ridership, right? And as you're aware that, you know, last year we budgeted 101% for bus and 85% for streetcar and subway for the course of the year, with the intent of getting back to 100% by the end of the year. And that doesn't happen. So I'd let you know that this morning we had between 93 and 94% of service on all routes based on scheduling 90% post November 21 of this year, recognizing the vaccine policy. And the intent now is through a hiring program. As you're aware, we did a hiring program through the end of this year. And in February, we're going to present a presentation to the board on how we're doing outreach in 2022, with the intent of doing significant hiring right through the first half of the year to get ourselves to 100% of pre-COVID numbers, not just pre-November 21st.
Okay, so and then my last question, I believe, is like I read on social media, also it was alluded to today, this lack of transparency, which has never been my experience with this organization. I can't actually believe how transparent this organization is. No matter what happens, there's a press release about it. So could you just clarify, when some of the workers weren't willing to get vaccinated, you had to alter some of the routes temporarily. We didn't get a lot of emails. There was a bit of activity on Twitter, limited, but what wasn't transparent about that? I saw the minute you knew you didn't have this many people vaccinated, you put out a release about the fact that you were making sure you're prioritizing areas where there's high demand and demand response, as well as just getting to those frontline workers and vulnerable individuals, making sure they were covered. So can somebody elaborate on that?
Yeah, I'd be happy through you, Chair, again. As you've always heard me talk about is the intentions to match capacity demand. And early on in COVID, as you recall, there were a lot of service interruptions, recognizing like society, we were losing our operators. We changed our schedules, and it took us a few months to get our schedules changed. And we built in the flexibility in there so that we had up to 140 runners directed vehicles built into the schedules to adjust so that we could put vehicles where they were needed. And our focus was to put the vehicles on the high demand routes. You always remember the 25 high demand routes when we were talking about Dufferin and Jane and Finch and Eglinton East, right? And all of our planning and overtime expenditures was associated with making sure that we focused on the high demand routes. Today, I can tell you that 40% of our buses today have less than 15 people in them, and we know that a bus holds 51 people. I'd also tell you that the focus was not on the discretionary routes, because people would love to have that opportunity, but any hiring we could do, and you heard Jim say it the last board meeting, the hiring that we do is focused on where the need was, all right? And even today, we have a hard time filling whatever overtime we have. We also know that, like society, right? Although we try to forecast where we put our service, we announced in the summer we were increasing service by 25% in the subway, all right, recognizing the forecast that were presented to this board on ridership. We do have our challenges, though. There was a period of time when, even though Jim said we were offering overtime, we couldn't fill it. When you have more than 400, I'm going to say bus operators at some point, 400 bus operators a day calling in sick, again, we're just like society. COVID had an impact on people. It was very difficult to fill some of those routes, so the focus was always on the high areas. So I just let you know that, because that's how we'll be managing this. Put the service where it's needed, focus on the schedules where it's needed, and the overtime where it's needed.
Okay, thank you very much for that clarification. That was very helpful. I don't believe there's any other questions, so we're going to move to a second round of questions because Commissioner Carroll has requested that. Have I missed anybody, though? I just want to make sure. I don't think so. Okay, Commissioner Carroll, you can go ahead.
Yes, thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, the reason I asked about Metro passes is I just want to unpack that a little bit. Well, monthly passes, Metro passes is an antique phrase, isn't it? So I heard that it's slowly growing. We're 66,000 and 68,000, but we're still well below. That still leaves us as maybe 800,000 a year if we're lucky, monthly passes. Am I right about that?
So through the chair, it's about, yes, it's about 100 and maybe 30,000 Metro passes that haven't been sold since pre-COVID.
Right. So the 130 per month, you mean?
Yes, sorry.
Right, right. Because we were selling, 2.5 million monthly passes or thereabouts back in 2017, 2018. So what I'm getting at is, in the olden days, in the before times, when we were looking at what is the cost of adjusting Metro Pass, we would have to say, oh, we have to do this. There's a cost to reducing the amount of Metro Passes. We'd have to say that to the people who always come and make a deputation that Metro Passes are too expensive. But I'm wondering if you've done any of the modeling when ridership is so depressed and the sale of them is so depressed. Is it not a different calculation? If you can make a small adjustment on the break-even number of trips, and suddenly you get back up by maybe 200,000 over the year of improved sales, that would be 10,000, 12,000 more being sold a month. You make more than you lose by reducing the fare. If you took a cost of 10 million to reduce the number of trips, it seems to me that if we improve the sales on them, we can make 28, maybe $30 million on the increase in sales we might get from frontline workers who continue to have to go to work 7 days a week. Have you done that modeling in this depressed ridership circumstance?
Through you, Chair, I'll jump in, Josie, if that's okay with you. That's exactly the modeling that Angela and her team are doing now, that we'll be back with that update in February. You know, many people have asked over the years, if we reduce the cost of a monthly pass, would it be offset by the increased purchases and ridership? It's not always true. And so I don't want to speak for Angela, but I know she's doing a lot of work for February's report, and you'll see just that, Councillor.
But if we lock into this budget, what then is the result? We get a report that says we can do something, but we won't do it till the end of that year.
We'd have to come back in May with the final report, and then the intention would be build it into the 2023 budget.
So, yeah. So what I'm saying is that the change wouldn't come until 2023, and at that point we might not be in these depressed circumstances. Do you see what I'm saying? Like,
Oh, no,
absorbing it into the current budget, which we're being helped to fund by other governments in terms of ridership growth, makes sense at the beginning of 2022. Am I missing something? Why
No,
wait
you're not.
till the ridership's already back?
So I would tell you that right now, I don't want to give it away. It's called capping is what Angela is looking at, as opposed to reducing monthly passes, because we're looking at every opportunity to get as many people back as possible. And there's likely to be a cost element to it, but I'm going to leave that to Angela to bring back in February.
Okay, but bringing it back in February so that we can consider something for the 2023 budget means it doesn't matter when the report comes. There's a whole year of savings that workers can't make, is what you're saying.
Yeah, I would also remind the board that what's happening is we're doing the overview, right, in the analysis, but then we'd have to work with our partners like Presto, for instance, to make any associated software changes, and the likelihood with that. So we have to get the plan through first before we have any discussions.
So one last question: how complicated is the software change? You have one purchase. You purchase the pass for the month. You're feeding into your Presto software $156. If tomorrow we said feed in $145 and take the trip break-even point down to 45, how hard is that change in software? You're just changing one input, the cost of that monthly transaction.
So I'm sorry, Councillor, what I was talking about is we're looking at a capping. How many times a month you would use the system, how many times you would tap, and what number would it stop charging you the additional fare? Angela, if you just give us a little highlight of what you're going to be bringing in February.
Sorry, we're having audio difficulty.
I apologize. We're looking at a completely transformative approach to offering value to our customers. So fare capping is a way that after all of our customers have reached a certain threshold per month or per week, they would then experience a free fare for the remaining part of the month, right? So the difference between what we're looking at, which is fare capping, versus the monthly pass, is the monthly pass system. Everyone who wants to participate has to proactively decide that they are going to sign up for the monthly pass and then purchase it. This system that we're proposing is one that would be open to all of our customers, and no one has to predetermine at the beginning of the month that they want to participate. So if you have for instance, a customer who's able to make X amount of rides, 50 rides or 40 rides per month, they would be able to benefit from the fare capping. It's a much better system. It's a system where many of our other transit peers are moving towards. And it's one that our board, as a board, you can determine how much you dial it up or how much you dial it down. So you can control the thresholds that you'd like to see our customers participate with. And what we're bringing back in February and in May is the analysis that's behind that, so you can see the different tiers that we can recommend that we proceed forward with, as well as we can also change it per customer type. So you can have a different threshold for seniors and youth, a different threshold for your Fare Pass customers than you have from your adults customers. This proposal is much more transformational than what we have today, the monthly pass.
Yeah, and I love it. My problem with it is how long it takes to do it. What we heard.
Last question.
what we heard from the Coalition of Better Childcare this morning is, in the meantime, the single mom's going to pay 140, 160 more dollars this year for a system that's not even getting her there on time, and that's a long year to wait. So, is there a way to do both, or that's just not in the cards?
Well, you know,
Make
based
an
on
adjustment for this year and then deliver the new system next year. That's not possible.
well, I'll take it back and I'll come back with a recommendation to see what we can do, what possibly we might be able to do earlier, and that might not be too costly. So how about you come up with a proposal and then the board can decide.
Fantastic. Thank you. Thanks, Madam Chair, for your indulgence.
Okay, so I believe that's all the questions. Let's move to speakers on this item, please. Anybody would like to speak? Okay, Commissioner Carroll, go ahead.
Thanks, Madam Speaker. I hate waiting till February, but I'll wait till February because it's a few short weeks away. But my intention was to move today that we got to reduce the break-even number of trips to 45 because people just can't wait. And what's happening, for every day that they are not buying $156 monthly pass with the most number of trips to break even of any pass we know of in North America, for every day that they're doing that, they're saying, I can't afford that monthly pass. Can I get a ride from someone? Which we don't want them doing during Omicron. I give up, I'm working late, I'm just going to Uber because transit's so expensive anyway. We're driving them to other modes of transit that ultimately are probably more expensive in their lives because we couldn't take what is their routine, the TTC trip, and make it affordable. And I hate the idea of waiting a whole nother year to get to where we resolve that problem. I'm having a hard time understanding why we can't adjust the trip multiple on the monthly pass, even for that 1 year, until we change to capping. Like it really does represent to that childcare mom who's paying overpriced for childcare, who's got a premier or won't cut a deal, who is the frontline worker, who's lost the wage premium that they used to get at the beginning of the pandemic and they no longer get it. And that's the person who, despite their really struggling circumstances, is basically keeping the transit system afloat right now. No one else is. It's those frontline workers. And they've lost their benefits. Nurses aren't getting paid extra, childcare workers aren't getting paid extra, but they're keeping the society going, and will do right through Omicron. You know who is getting extra? They just quietly announced that the doctors delivering the booster shots, they'll get paid extra, but I'm guessing they're driving to work. They're not our rider. Our rider is really struggling, and I really think we need an interim strategy until this capping is ready, because if it's not delivered on time, it's a problem. I would move my motion. I got a feeling you'll squash it. But we really should be on an emergency basis doing the trip multiple change. If we dropped it, cost you about $10 million to drop the trip multiples to 45 trips. Still wouldn't be great, but it would be something. But you would earn back, I'm guessing, probably about 200,000 monthly passes for the year, and that would earn you $28,800,000. I don't know why we're not doing it. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you. Other speakers on this item? I'll just quickly say a few words. I want to thank our CEO, Rick Leary, and our CFO, Josie Lavida. I don't know. I've known her name for a million years. I don't know how I could possibly mispronounce that, but I just managed to. Of course, our Director of Budgets, Alex Cesar, the whole TTC staff who worked so hard despite battling very extensive challenges this year with COVID raging, a cyber attack, challenges with some of the workforce who wouldn't get vaccinated, the union executive that battled us on that, which was very disappointing. But nonetheless, through all those challenges and hurdles and obstacles, we have this budget in front of us today. So I'm very pleased that for a second year in a row, we will not be increasing fares for our riders. I think that's the good news story out of this budget, and very critical. I think we're all on board with that because it's been very challenging time for Torontonians and beyond, and the ongoing challenges of this pandemic. It's just been incredible. 18 months now, we're heading into 2 years that we've been all trying to navigate this this beast. We are restoring service in line with demand, and I think that's the best way forward, while investing in key programs and initiatives, including our innovation and sustainability review. And we need to continue increasing service levels and implementing service improvements to encourage our riders to return once it's safe to do so. So throughout this entire pandemic, we have continued to focus on demand responsiveness. We prioritize the routes where capacity is needed most, and we know where those are, where a lot of frontline workers live and are dependent on the system. And our staff told us today that this is the approach they will continue to take as we monitor the impacts of the Omicron variant. Very impressive work by the TTC staff. This budget incorporates 25 million in efficiencies without any service impacts. And if you remember the slide with the efficiency measures, base pressures, that slide was jam-packed. I mean, it was very hard to read because there was so much information on that one slide that talked about these efficiency measures, base pressures. So without any service impact. So excellent work. All the while, the TTC continues to transform and modernize each and every year. The budget also anticipates the Eglinton Crosstown LRT beginning operations this year. Fingers crossed, every finger I have in tow. I'm a Eglinton Crosstown councillor, so I can't wait for that ribbon to be cut. There's a lot of good news in this budget, but it's also very important that we highlight the fact that COVID's had a massive impact to the tune of $461.2 million. Our funding partners have been incredibly supportive. Can't say enough about that over the course of the pandemic, and we will be continuing discussions with our federal and provincial partners as we continue to battle this pandemic. So we are committed to pursuing a sustainable operating funding model for public transit. I think everybody's on board with that. We need something that's a model that works going into the future. And as we close off to 2021, and I couldn't be happier to see the back end of this year and hopeful for 2022, I'd like to again thank TT staff and our riders. It's been a tough year, but the TTC has kept the city moving throughout our darkest days. Even when we had a cyber attack, the system kept moving, and I will say safely. So I'll wrap up here. We're not out of the woods, but transit riders can continue to rely on the TTC for safe and reliable transportation in the year to come. Thank you very much, and I will move the motions before us. All in favor? Opposed?
Wait, hold on a sec, Madam Speaker. I'd like a recorded vote, please.
Okay, absolutely. Could we have a recorded vote if the clerk could conduct that, please?
Commissioner Bradford? Commissioner Bradford, your vote, please.
In favor?
Thank you. Commissioner Carroll?
Opposed?
Vice Chair De Laurentiis?
In favor.
Commissioner Mckelvey?
In favor.
Commissioner Minnan-Wong?
In favor.
Commissioner Osborne?
Voting in favor.
Chair Robinson?
In favor.
The item carries with a vote of 6-1.
Thank you very much. And now we'll move to item 3, which is the TTC 15-year capital investment plan, real estate investment plan, and 2022 to 2031 capital budget and plan. We don't have any deputations on this item, so I will turn it back to Josie for delivery of a presentation. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Chair. Good morning, everyone. At our last board meeting, the members considered a report that talked about our project management maturity. And in it, we identified a series of actions that we were going to take, including the need to set priorities, identify interdependencies in our capital work, ensure sufficient resources in place for capital delivery of our major capital projects. And today, as I present our progress, our priorities and plans, some of these things have been embedded. And so I'm pleased to bring for you a major update on our CRP, the introduction of our first real estate investment plan, and our 10-year capital plan for your approval. That also will bring the necessary capacity for a major capital project delivery. Next slide, please. So this presentation is quite full. There are a lot of things here for your review today. Would like to identify, of course, as a major update to our CIP, our progress since 2019, what that major capital investment plan looks like, our capital funding priorities, as well as an introduction to the real estate investment plan, and finally our 10-year capital plan. So we have made a lot of progress. But I guess the key message continues to be the same. If we don't secure the funding that's needed to maintain our system, clearly the future is at risk. Next slide, please. So our CIP was established to clearly lay out our capital needs, what's funded and not funded, and to bring awareness and understanding of the impacts of not funding. Since its inception, we're proud to say that we've made significant progress since 2019, and it has brought us results. Initially, our new Toronto-Ontario Transit Partnership did recognize the criticality of being able to fund transit state of good repair. We did get commitments from all three orders of government of $1.5 billion for the Bloor-Young Capacity Enhancement Program, which you saw at your last meeting is now at stage grade 3. We garnered $4.7 billion in new city building funds that has helped us fund a series of initiatives that we'll highlight soon. And most recently, we were able to secure $568 million from all three levels of government for 60 streetcar procurement and facility expansion. And finally, we ourselves did also, with the clarity of the CIP, be able to kind of rethink about what our priorities are, recalibrate our capital plan and funding sources, and repurpose $1.3 billion over the last 2 years to fund critical needs. Next slide. So this new funding that we've received has made it possible for us, as I just indicated, to enhance our Bloor-Young station, procure the 60 new streetcars and the Hillcrest streetcar storage capacity that goes along with it. It's given us sufficient funds to buy and procure 300 hybrid, an additional 300 electrical buses and the associated electrical bus charging, and also to fully fund our Line 2 automatic train control program. Next slide, please. This funding has also allowed us, is making it possible for us to actually start these programs, but these are not fully funded. So Line 1 capacity enhancement and Line 2 capacity enhancement both have had funds of 1.5 and 800 million respectively. It's also provided us with a proportion of the cost for new subway trains, but does not allow us to procure that on an ongoing basis. We did allocate funds to critical state of good repair of 158 million with these new funds, but that is only a start. Next slide, please. So long-term investment in TTC is as critical as ever for our customers. Clearly, it's ensuring that we continue to have safe, seamless, and reliable transit that allows us to be inclusive and accessible and resilient and financially sustainable. And for our city, it's key ensuring healthy economic recovery It helps support the future GTHA growth. Of course, resilience and climate action targets can be met with our transit efforts. And finally, it contributes to a financially sustainable, more equitable city. Next slide, please. What's really revealed during the pandemic is that public transit is essential for keeping our city moving, both through good times and bad. And really, for the sake of Toronto's health and prosperity, we must keep investing in its future. Slide. So what happens if we don't invest in a timely manner? Clearly, maintenance and replacement will fall further behind. System will continue to break down more often. Our customer trust will fail. The cost to fix will balloon. And of course, reliability is at risk. That really is the risk of not continuing to invest. Next slide, please. Additionally, without the funding, the state of good repair backlog will grow. And based on what is funded in the 10-year capital plan for 2022, what we see is that 12.8% of our total asset value state of good repair backlog will grow to 12.8% as a percent of our asset value by 26 and could reach 33% by 2031 based on our current funding that's in place. Next slide, please. Essentially, to get more from our transit investments, it's really important that we advance on all 4 fronts in a coordinated way. So if there's an investment in one category of requirements, but not the others, they will fall behind and the entire system is weakened. We are taking a very integrated approach in how we plan and manage our capital assets, both from a planning perspective, but also as we look at the various areas. So our fleet, our operational facilities, our systems network, and of course, our real estate all need to work in lockstep with each other. Next slide, please. And so there are a number of priority projects that remain unfunded in the CIP. And most, we look at these larger programs, what we see is that there are critical interdependencies. And if one is delayed, it actually does jeopardize the larger program investment. And so while here we have a series of numbers, over the following five slides, I'd like to lay these out a bit more effectively. Next slide. When we think about modernizing the subway and expanding our capacity, we do need 80 new subway trains that need to be funded according to our vehicle program staff yesterday. But with that, we also need to ensure that we can modify our Greenwood yard and ensure that we have the right storage that's available in time for the delivery of trains. Next slide, please. Think about supporting our larger streetcar fleet. We do need to renew our Russell Car House so that we can make the modifications necessary for the larger fleet. But we also need to ensure that we continue to upgrade our overhead powers so those streetcars can run on them. And finally, think about how we use our Hillcrest complex, not only to support our streetcar operations, but also to ensure that we're maximizing its utility. Next slide, please. Our efforts to transform and electrify our bus service identifies a need to procure an additional fleet of 1,226 all-electrical buses as according to our fleet strategy and plan. But we also need another 382 Wheel-Trans buses and the associated infrastructure to support them. Combine that with the need to fund our transit priority projects to ensure that we can cut through the congestion on the city's busiest bus routes to enable for more reliable service. Next slide, please. And when we think about our state of good repair projects, key area of underfunding, of course, is our fleet overhaul. So our ability to actually be able to have scheduled maintenance for our different types of fleet requires funding to allow us to have scheduled and maintenance of our 145 subway cars annually, 30 streetcars annually, and an overhaul of our buses of 205 annually. Next slide, please. And finally, when we look at our infrastructure, there are a series of requirements around that are safety and legislated in nature, requiring funding that starts in 2023. And we can see that in our system maintenance, we need immediate funding there of about 7 million by 23, but on average about 40 million per year thereafter to ensure that these are maintained in state of good repair. And finally, in our operational infrastructure, we see requirement for funding of 119 million by 23, but an average of about 140 million thereafter to ensure that we have a steady state of funding for our operational infrastructure. Next slide, please. So for buses, subways, and streetcars, our Toronto circulatory system, then I'd like us to think about our real estate portfolio as being being the backbone. And as another key step in further integrating our approach to capital investment planning, we're introducing our first ever 15-year real estate investment plan, which is a companion document to our CIP. I would now like to turn the presentation over to Pamela Kraft, our Head of Property Planning and Development, who will walk you through that. Thank you. Pamela?
Thank you, Josie. We refer to the real estate investment plan as on solid ground. It is, as Josie was mentioning, a companion document to the capital investment plan, and it sets the strategic direction for the planning and management of our real estate portfolio. It establishes property-focused strategies, objectives, and priorities, provides a roadmap for the TTC and our city partners to ensure that the TTC needs are known, met, and integrated into city building initiatives. It provides a 15-year implementation action plan and timeline that maps out property timing and other actions. It identifies the funding status, which is consistent with the capital investment plan. Next slide, please. So the strategic outcome is a strategically planned, optimized, and managed real estate portfolio that meets TTC's current needs and ensures sustainable growth. Our investment principles are to optimize use before acquiring, acquire before expropriating, own rather than lease, uncouple the timing of acquisition from the timing of construction, include back of house needs, integrate resiliency, be flexible, sustainable, and innovate, and maximize value creation with the city. Next slide, please. Our real estate strategy must navigate a range of complex considerations. Toronto real estate is expensive with fractured ownership and adjacent use sensitivities. Maximizing use may require substantial redesign and construction, which cannot negatively impact our service. Approvals, design, financing, and construction can require long lead times, often in excess of 10 years. And our facilities must be large and spread throughout the city to minimize deadheading costs. The size and type of property that we need appear infrequently in the open market. Timing and cost must meet service delivery deadlines and budgets. We must balance our needs with competing city mandates. And the approval process for property acquisition limits the ability to nimbly participate in private sector deals. Next page. So we have a wide-ranging real estate portfolio. Our facilities, which includes yards, car houses, and garages that house, maintain, and support our fleet, includes 9 garages, 3 streetcar shops, 3 streetcar car houses, 5 subway yards, and 1.3 million square feet of industrial space. Our system, which includes stations, stops, and bus and streetcar loops, includes 75 subway stations, 69 traction power substations, 27 bus and streetcar loops, 73 third-party entrance connections to our subway, and over 9,500 bus and streetcar stops. Our office space includes our corporate office as well as our operational support space, with our headquarters at 1900 Yonge Street, 9 lease facilities across the city, in addition to that space located within our garages, car houses, and our yards. Next page, please. Our decisions must be carefully coordinated to support the current and future needs of the TTC and the city. We want to optimize existing uses first, acquire land when we cannot optimize further. We want to explore opportunities for best use and support city building objectives. Next, please. So facilities plan. How can our real estate strategy provide a network of fully utilized, safe facilities across the city to house, maintain, and support our fleet? By optimizing the existing facilities prior to acquiring new ones. We're optimizing existing through Greenwood and Davisville yards, Wilson Complex, and e-bus charging systems. We're acquiring land for train maintenance and storage facility, our northern yard, and also our 10th garage. We're supporting city building by vacating Danforth Garage to enable a Housing Now redevelopment. And we're exploring opportunities to maximize the Hillcrest complex. Next. On our system, how can our real estate strategy enable a safer, more accessible network of stations, stops, and bus and streetcar loops that can meet the needs of a changing fleet? Partially by working closely with third-party developers and also acquiring property in anticipation of future needs. We need to acquire land to implement the Easier Access Phase 3 and Second Exit programs, the Bloor-Yonge Station expansion, streetcar loops, and the Waterfront East LRT. And we can support city building through the transition of commuter parking to support city redevelopment and new bus depots at Warden and Islington stations for accessible connections and Housing Now projects. Next, please. On our office space, how can our real estate strategy efficiently provide modern, fit-for-purpose office space that meets varied needs? By consolidating our corporate office space as part of Modern TO, which will eliminate the use of long-term lease space and transform TTC's office culture. So we can support the city building by transferring 1900 Yonge, our Davisville office, to enable the highest and best use of the site and value creation for Create TO, as well as consolidate into city centers shared with municipal services. We can explore opportunities for a long-term solution for our transit and revenue protection staff. Next page. So our next steps is circulate the real estate investment plan, begin its implementation, bringing individual matters to the board when required, and update it annually with the CIP and the 10-year plan. Thank you very much. And Josie, back to you.
Thank you, Pam. So now I'd like to present our 22 to 2031 capital plan, which is the funded portion of our capital investment plan. Next slide, please. So our asset inventory continues to rise. At the end of 21, it totals 21.15 billion in our assets required to deliver services. Next slide. So from a financial perspective, our capital investment plan was updated. It's $37.22 billion, a marginal change over the 15-year period. But what we did do was look at a series of our projects and areas there were some adds that we included, like the Russell Car House modification extension, adding electric charge systems for non-revenue vehicles, refining our estimates and requirements for Line 1 and Line 2 capacity projects, and actually deleting 2 projects from it, which was a new streetcar maintenance and storage facility and the Leslie Street second exit. Next slide, please. So overall, the 15-year capital plan, investment plan is presented by mode on the left side. And as you can see, over 57% is attributable to works required for our subway system. And to the right, as you move along to the left of that, if you combine our surface fleet for bus, streetcar, and Wheel-Trans, it's another 23% attributable to supporting that fleet, and our stations and other infrastructure make up 20%. On the right side, the health and safety and legislated requirements contribute about 4%, and then equally, our state of good repair and service improvement projects are 48% respectively. Next slide. So as we went through the 2022 process, once again, we reviewed and recalibrated our 10-year capital plan by looking at our cash flows to align with project timing, it's our stage gating refinements, looking at our readiness, assessing our critical needs, and reviewing our funding sources. And as a result, we repurposed and reinvested $315 million into a series of projects, some of which are highlighted to the right as critical needs that required funding in 2022. And as you can see, are pretty much split between state of good repair and service improvement projects. Next slide, please. So as a highlight, the capital budget and plan that's before you for your approval totals $12.1 billion, of which $8.9 billion, or 74% of it, relates to 27 major projects or programs. It's making progress on delivering on our procurement strategy with the 60 streetcar, 300 hybrid, and 300 e-bus procurement, as well as 70 Wheel-Trans buses. Continues work on our 3 major capacity improvement projects, Bloor-Yonge, Line 1 and Line 2 capacity. It allows us to complete ATC on Line 1, and it provides full funding for ATC on Line 2. And it continues to move us to a steadier state of funding for essential safety and state of good repair capital work, ensures funding to meet legislative requirements, continues our business modernization agenda, and this year builds capacity within our major projects to enhance coordination of activities and its resources. Next slide.
Of course.
So just as we look at it from an overall 10-year view, the orange line represents our 21 10-year capital plan, and the blue line is our 22 to 31. So overall, not much different in the adjustment. You do see a little blip in 23 and 24. And if you move to the next slide, we can highlight that a little bit more succinctly. So at the top, what we see is our infrastructure projects, where we did add funding, as I mentioned, both for our Russell Yard and Car House modifications to begin that work. We adjusted some of our funding, our timing for some other projects like the Line 1 resignaling, our SAP, and some other items. And on the vehicle side, we added funding to provide some additional capacity for our bus midlife overhaul through reallocation of funding elsewhere so we can accelerate some of this critical work. Next slide, please. So when we look at our major programs of $12 billion, you can see how that's been allocated out. 28% to buildings and structures, with another 28% to capacity improvements. And you can see vehicles then at the bottom there take up the next largest portion, with the balance of the program allocated out to our various infrastructure and technology requirements. Next slide, please. So from a funding perspective, the City of Toronto funding of $7.8 billion, mostly from city building funds, makes up 65% of how this plan will be funded. The provincial funding as at 13% and federal at 22%. Combined, our funding partners are providing 1/3 of the funding sources for this program, most notably with their commitment of $500 million each as their 1/3 share for the Bloor-Yonge enhancement project. Next slide, please. So these charts highlight for you some of the projects that either A, require coordination with the city and other third parties, and or B, are major projects that require resourcing for delivery and oversight as per our project management maturity report. And as a result, we are recommending that additional resources to be funded from our capital plan provide us with the necessary and required capacity for the TTC, and also to dedicate some resources in city divisions to support us through the delivery of these programs. Together, we believe that this will ensure that we are the critical success in our delivery. Next slide, please. So the $12 billion capital plan that we just presented is the funded portion of our CIP. And as you can see on the left-hand side, there remains about 11.2, almost $3 billion that's unfunded with our priorities the next 5 years, which were highlighted earlier. And then when you look out beyond the 10-year period, there's an additional 25 billion that's sitting in the last 5 years. And when we assume about 2.6 billion that can be funded, then that leaves us 22.5 billion yet to be funded. Next slide, please. So just to lay it out a little differently, this chart identifies some of the key program areas and what the values are according with that unfunded portion of our CRP. 4.9 billion, as you can see in the fleet purchase program, is required to fully fund the balance of our fleet procurement. Look a little further down is 1.9 billion that's required to complete our vehicle overhauls over the next 15 years. And finally, the other major area outside of our service planning requirements is the funding required to complete Line 1 and Line 2 capacity enhancements. The total, Line 1 needs a total of 3.7 billion and Line 2 requires another 3.1 billion in order for us to ensure that these projects are fully completed. And now I'd just like to hand over the presentation to Gary Downey, our Chief Capital Officer, who will take a few moments to focus in on Line 1 and Line 2 capacity projects, given their significance. Gary?
Okay. Thank you, Josie, and good afternoon. Following on from Josie's update on the capital budget and the capital investment plan, I will take you through an update on the Line 1 and Line 2 capacity enhancement programs. The slide in front of you highlights the ridership growth, which is driving the works that will be required to modernise both lines under the capacity enhancement programs. As you can see from the graph, ridership on both lines is projected to grow by approximately 30% through growth and the line extension projects between now and 2041. Next slide, please. This slide gives an overview of the programme objectives, and these were to identify the elements and issues constraining capacity on both lines, identifying issues constraining the ability to receive and maintain the T1 replacement trains on Line 2. We also ensured that the capacity enhancement programmes were aligned with the new subway train procurement on Line 1 and Line 2, ATC on Line 2, as well as the Line 1 and Line 2 subway extensions and the Bloor-Young Capacity Enhancement Programme. The outcome was to assess and recommend selected enhancement projects to achieve service capacity targets. Both the programmes are early stages and we are currently at Stage Gate 1 on Line 1 and Stage Gate 0 on Line 2. Next slide, please. Over the next two slides, we have highlighted the scope, which we have grouped into three distinct categories, these being stations, systems and infrastructure, and trains and yards. We have highlighted within the two slides the overall cost, including a breakdown by category, as well as the projected completion dates for some of these projects. Some of the major stations works on Line 1 includes the vertical circulation changes aimed at improving passenger flow and managing train dwell time at St Andrews, St George's and Dundas. Modifications to station concourses, including additional fare gates at King and St Andrews, and adding an additional exit to St Andrews, as well as constructing a second platform at St George's Station by 2036. Within the systems and infrastructure, this includes new traction power substations between VMC and Pioneer Station, as well as modification to the existing substations. We've got fire ventilation upgrades at St Clair's West Station, as well as Leighton and Markdale emergency service buildings. And the guideways improvements is to add resiliency, maintain service reliability, and to ensure existing systems are in a state of good repair. These includes additional pocket track at VMC by 2041, extending the Davisville North Tail track by 2032, adding siding tracks between Bloor-Young and Rosedale by 2028, and the clearance of restricted speed zones with direct fixation track between 2020 and 2037. On the trains and yards, we're looking at a new train and maintenance and storage facility on the northeast leg of Line 1 by the early 2030s. We're also looking at an auxiliary train and maintenance facility on the west leg of Line 1 at Wilson by 2027. And we're also looking at modifications to the existing infrastructure at Wilson Yard to accommodate a substantial increase in the fleet size required for the demand growth and the Line 1 extension. Next slide, please. Very similar to Line 1, we break the works into the same three categories. So the works in the stations here include modifications to the station concourse and platforms at all mentioned stations. The vertical circulation changes that aim improving passenger flow at Keele, Spadina and Broadview. Expanding stations and entrances at Broadview, Spadina, Keele and Jane, as well as expanding both bus platforms at Keele, Jane and Woodbine and streetcar platforms at Spadina. On the systems and infrastructure side, new traction power stations between Warden and Kennedy, and modifications to existing at Warden, Danforth, Bedford and Asquith. Again, looking at the guideway improvements, again, it's to add the resiliency on Line 2, such as new track storages at Warden and increase capacity at the Keele Yard. Also converting the open cut areas and interlocks to direct fixation track at Islington to Kipling and Victoria Park to Warden. Again, just looking at the trains and yards on Line 2, we're looking at renovating the Greenwood Car House, the track, the facilities to receive the new trains, renovating and upgrading the Overhaul shop there, as well as re-signalling the Greenwood Yard. As we continue to develop the programme and projects, we will be updating the board at the appropriate stages. I'll now hand it back to Josie.
Thank you, Gary, for that. This finalizes our presentation. I acknowledge that there's a lot of information that was presented today, but in summary, I'd just like to say we've updated our CIP with a focus on our major programs and their interdependencies, and we're seeking the board's endorsement on that. We've introduced the real estate investment plan that takes a holistic approach to how we plan and manage our portfolio, and we are seeking endorsement on the guiding principles and the plan there. And finally, we've presented our 21 to 2031 capital plan that meets our most critical needs within our available funding, and we are seeking your approval on that. I'd like now to conclude this presentation. And before I do, though, I'd like to thank the executive and all of their teams for all their hard work and support through the 22 budget process. Open to questions now. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that exhaustive presentation. That was something else. Good work. I'm going to ask Commissioner Mckelvey to ask questions first.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And you may have covered it, but just so it's like really top of mind, the city just passed their net zero strategy. And I know there was some discussion with Ttc along the lines of the green bus fleet, where you're at with that, the transition to fully electric. So maybe can you just summarize what is included next year in this regard?
Pam Case, could you handle that question, please?
Hi to Mohammed. I was just talking with Bim and his computer just crashed. So if we could maybe defer this question for a few minutes while he's rebooting.
Sure. Do you want to go to somebody else and then come back?
Okay. I also have a motion on that, Councillor Mckelvey, that I think you'll like. So you'll be very happy with. I'm going to move to the Vice Chair. If you could please ask your questions next.
Thank you, Chair. And yeah, I'd like to add my thanks to the group for presenting this information. I think it's really terrific to see it on an annual basis. So my question is really around the fact that a lot of the presentation speaks to the costs, and there are in some of the slides the benefits. And so my question to the group is, can you enhance those elements of it? Because when we debate this issue, or when this issue is debated or discussed at council, or or is considered, externally. I think underlining the benefits of the capital investment program is critical. And so is that something that you could enhance for next year's presentation? Because again, as I say, it's the, if you were to ask the question of employers and developers within the metro area, as to the importance of really good transit and continued investment in transit, it would be a pretty positive answer. And so building some of that information into this presentation is really a good reminder when because you look at the numbers and they're in the billions, but they really do deliver the benefits. So my question is, could we enhance the benefit component in next year's presentation?
Through the chair, absolutely, Commissioner. There are obviously different types of benefits, qualitative and quantitative, and we will work on both.
Okay, we're going to move to Commissioner Bradford next for questions.
Thanks, Madam Chair. I can be brief, but congrats on the new real estate investment plan. That's what I want to pick up on. I think that's a really pragmatic and smart move on the TTC to roll that into to our capital planning. I'm just wondering if somebody could walk me through the TTC's relationship with CreateTO and with the city, and how we're making sure that the TTC's priorities are included into the real estate thinking at the City of Toronto.
Hi, it's Pam Kraft from the Property Planning and Development Department. So I will take that question. So we do meet monthly with the CreateTO and the city real estate. And then there's also quarterly meetings with the executive of TTC and the executives of CreateTO. So we have provided them with our list of requirements. The real estate investment plan before you is more fulsome. So it's more, it will be kind of more of a larger package spread out over a longer period of time for them to be aware of our requirements. And so we work with them on our priorities and kind of our up and coming projects.
And so my understanding, through the city real estate process, when lands are surplused, there's sort of a call out to other divisions and agencies to see if those lands are needed for anything. What does that process look like on the TTC side when we decide that we're able to surplus land, or a location is not what we're looking for anymore, and we want to make a move on that? What's that process look like, and how does that fit into the capital planning here?
So what's been identified in the capital plan, for instance, is the upcoming surplus of 1900 Yonge Street, the Davisville. So we realized through the office consolidation process, those uses will be consolidated into a city center. And then that building, when TTC has vacated it, will be surplus for a higher and better use. The Danforth Garage has also been identified as a housing now, and there's the known TTC uses that must be relocated from there before that property can be relocated. So it's, and then there's some commuter parking lots that have been removed for housing now projects. And so there's a coordination process on how those are transitioned and TTC's use on them ends. And it's transitioned over for a parking lot. So TTC first needs to decide that something is not required by TTC if it's our facility, and it's handed over, or the when TTC no longer has a requirement, or if TTC has a need and the city wants the property, then we can't leave it until our use has been relocated to our satisfaction.
So is CreateTO here?
No, sorry, CreateTO was not on the call.
Okay, so I saw the slide there with city building objectives as it related to Danforth Garage there, and this is something I'm following very closely. Who identifies? So you just said it to me there in your answer, Pam, that this was identified as a housing now site. So is that CreateTO driving that process, or is it actually a decision that is the genesis is here with the TTC? in our decision to relocate that those operations elsewhere? Or is that because Create TO or real estate would say, hey, we have bigger city building objectives that we would like to achieve, housing now on this site? You know, would you be able to accommodate that? How does that work?
So on that particular property, it's fairly clear that it's not the highest and best use of like storage thing. The storage on on that property could be relocated in other locations, and TTC be accommodated.
I understand that. There was originally plans, though, it was not just storage, empty barns there as it exists today. Actually, we had operations plans there as well, which have been relocated to another site. So who's driving that decision? Is that coming from the TTC, or are we being asked to accommodate that from Create TO?
TTC's needs need to be addressed to TTC's satisfaction. In that particular
That's not what I'm asking, though. Respectfully, my question is, who's driving the decision? Is that brought to you in the conversations with real estate and Create TO? Like, we would like you to accommodate this, and then we see if we can accommodate it, or is that a decision that we're making, and then, you know, we go back to real estate and Create TO and say, oh, you know, we're actually going to relocate because of X, Y, and Z, and as a result, you know, there's city building opportunities on the site. Who's driving the decision? I understand that we can accommodate it, but who's driving it?
I think it varies from situation to situation. In that particular situation, there was a use that TTC was going to put onto the property. The way the master plan kind of evolved, and from a timing perspective, it was no longer suitable for TTC, and an alternative site was found that was that met TTC's requirements from a timing and functional perspective. And so we were located elsewhere.
Okay. I'm still not happy with those answers, but I see that my time is out. But
through you, Chair, if I may, it's Rick Leary. I think that to answer your question, Councillor, it wasn't the TTC driving it at the time, but it was a great alternative presented to us. I let you know that we should have brought it back to I had the discussion after the last board meeting with the chair. We should have brought it back to the board so you were aware of the changes that took place. We're happy with the new location, but we didn't report out on that, so my apologies, sir.
okay. Those are all my questions, Madam Chair.
Okay, thank you very much. We're going to go back to Commissioner Mckelvey because we've got Bem on the line now. So if Bem, you could answer the commissioner's question. Or if you need her to repeat it, I'm sure she's happy to do that. We've got Bem, correct?
It appears we may have an audio issue, Chair.
Oh my gosh. Okay. Well, we hope to get you an answer at some point. I see Josie. Do you have a comment?
Well, if I may, maybe I can help, and then if Bem can hear us, then at least he can identify maybe some amendment to that. Or so to be clear, what's funded in the capital plan is the ability to purchase 300 hybrid and 300 electrical buses, as well as funding to start the purchase of electric bus charging. However, we also know that there is a program that could provide us with federal matching funds that could, if we are able to secure that through the zero emission bus program, that we could actually increase the number of buses by up to 100 with 500 charging stations that would give us enough for the 400 plus more. And so that is, so if we take the funding that we have, we could probably use that to leverage matching funds in a program that we are submitting a request to be considered.
I am here now if you have any further questions.
Okay. Do you want to
everyone?
Bem, would you like to augment that answer at all? Or
I didn't even hear all of the answer that Josie offered, so I apologize. But I will just say briefly that we are on track to deliver 300 hybrid buses, which will reduce emissions by 47% in 2023 and 2022. And then our next e-bus procurement, which would have buses coming in the third quarter of 2023 through the first quarter of 2025. We have the traditional 1/3 city share, as you're aware, but are awaiting full funding from the other levels of government. But we'd be ready to go ahead with RFP issuance on that procurement in Q1 of next year.
Okay, double answer there. Thank you very much. Commissioner Mckelvey, do you have any further questions? Okay, thank you. We're going to move now to Commissioner Carroll for questions.
Thanks, Madam Chair. A lot of my questions have been answered. I was sort of panicking, writing down questions in the beginning part of the presentation, but the presentation really has fleshed out the report for me. The real estate strategy, though, which is we're seeing as a companion document here, how much of this real estate approach have we adopted in in-year board reports?
So, sorry, through the chair, just to be clear, Commissioner, are you asking how much has been reflected in our approach thus far?
Yeah. It says this on solid ground is a companion document to the capital investment plan, and it's embedded in the report described to us to our first ever 15-year plan, whatever. But have we deliberated it over as it as a board, or is it just sort of it's evolved over time and this is our approach now?
If I could, Josie, through you, Chair, I wanted to let you know a little bit more why we initiated this, because as you've seen in capital projects historically, we have hundreds of different capital projects. The intent here now is to consolidate them as we've shown under Greenwood Shops. What is the consolidated project with one overall steering committee as opposed to many, many smaller ones? Same with Hillcrest, doing the exact same thing. So this is a document that really helps us internally strategize on how we're going to work towards the future, as well as the interdependencies with the city and create TO.
Right, but is this the first time I'm seeing it?
Yes, oh, absolutely. Yeah. Yes, you are.
Because it's sort of like it really is adopting a policy. One I agree with, granted. This is to me welcome news. That we tried leasing for years, and we just end up getting dinged because they feel they have us over a barrel once we have a lease. So we're going to acquiring as our strategy. That's a policy change, though. We're making a policy decision here, and it's just coming at us in a budget presentation. What's the plan to make this clear to us? And if we adopt the budget today, are we adopting this strategy and that's that?
So through the chair, what's before you is seeking endorsement from the board on the guiding principles, which lays them out. Those very principles that were in the presentation, that lays them out really in that order in terms of our beliefs around what we would do first, second, and third. So that is before you today. And we have laid out also, and attached to the report is what the plan looks like as a result of the CIP and the capital budget and plan that's funded. That plan is also set out for you at the back. We believe that sets the basis for the real estate investment plan, and we will bring matters forward on that basis on a case-by-case basis, and then annually as part of the CIP update. So, but this is really the first that it's been here, and our report, the last meeting, which looked at that property acquisition, was really the first approach at using and applying these principles.
But you get why I'm asking this question, I'm hoping. I asked this question, and Madam Speaker, I know you want to say this is the most transparent organization, but what I worry, we're adopting this today, and really, in line with the questions that Commissioner Bradford asked earlier. Say, there's a change to a facility, and we get a detailed report on that one facility. A year from now, 2 years from now, and we say, I don't want to do it this way. Are we going to be told, but you adopted the entire real estate strategy back on December 20th, 2021, and so this is just for information only? We're not in that territory, are we, if we adopt this today as an add-on to the budget?
So through the chair, we're asking you to endorse it and not to approve it because we understand that this is directional, this is a plan, subject to adjustments, and that we would be committed to bringing each item forward and
Right.
essentially, right, for the board approval. But this is what will guide our thinking, right? This
So
is our strategy.
so it's a guideline, but if we had real-time adjustments to the strategy based on the details that you bring us then, they would still be in order.
Yes.
Okay, that's a key thing. And then the only other question I had was on the presentation, and this goes to any intergovernmental conversations that we're having. You have to be. It's great to have a presentation like this when you're going at a federal MP who doesn't understand our system and talking to them about why they need money. There's great visuals in this presentation. Modernizing the subway, expanding capacity, the streetcar fleet, all the rest. So in those boxes, immediate funding required, is that an all-in number? Is that the number embedded in this year's 2022 submission? Or is that everything we need for this? We need 80 new subway trains. Immediate funding required 1.7 billion. Is that a blend of the funded and unfunded portion, or that's the unfunded number?
Last question.
So through the chair, in all cases, this is the unfunded portion that we've identified.
So we can really use this for intergovernmental conversations, even just using the visual slides. Thank you for that. That is fantastic. Thank you.
Okay, next we've got Commissioner Osborne. No, you need to start again. You're not unmuted. You need to unmute.
Sorry. I'll start again. Thanks, Madam Chair. Yeah, I have a question on the funding sources chart that's on page 7 of the document that we were sent. And there are two sources of funding that are either dwindling precipitously or completely disappearing. One is recoverable debt and the other is development charges. And I think recoverable debt includes the city building fund. Not sure if there are other things in there or what. I'm just wondering why these two at times very robust sources of funding are seem to be sunsetting in some fashion.
So through the chair, I'll start with the recoverable debt. So yes, our majority of funding of our plan to date has been on the city building fund. It's deemed to be recoverable debt because the tax levy increase that council approved is actually used as the source to pay the debt servicing costs. So it's a direct match dedicated to that purpose. So we had some in the capital plan prior to council's decision to increase it by 4.7 billion. But once that was increased, that gave us funding up to the 2029 period, and that funding source ends. And so unless there is a council decision and priority to add to that, that funding source would end and would be taken over by regular debt as the funding source. It's for a time period. It was enough funding and increases to generate that amount of money.
But the levy itself is not going away. It's just that we would no longer be the beneficiary. Is that the idea?
It would. So through the chair, the issue is that the levy doesn't go away, but the levy requirement is necessary to pay over the life of the term of the debt, which is at least 30 years. So it's taking that value and it's allowing us to generate the money based on borrowing, borrowing costs. So it is amount specific. And then on the development, sorry, yes.
I was just going to say, and what about the development charges? Because that's another thing that you would think would be a more steady state kind of situation.
So development charges funding is much more dependent on the types of projects that is eligible for that. So typically it's for growth projects. And any elements of our state of good repair that might contribute to that growth. So it is tied to a 10-year forecast, development charge bylaw, which is currently under review at the city. And so this is the stream that we anticipated based on the capital plan that's in place and those projects that are eligible for their funding. So it's not just a general funding source. It's tied to specific projects in the plan.
Okay, those are my questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Commissioner Denzelman and Wong.
Yeah, I'm curious about the electric buses. So when you compare the operating cost of a diesel bus versus an electric bus, what's the savings? Ben?
Have we got Ben?
He should know this one.
Yeah, through the chair, sorry about that. At the fleet level, the total savings is estimated about $60 million in fuel per year once the full fleet has been electrified.
When the full fleet's electrified?
Yes.
That's like all 5,000, Ben?
That's by that time it'll be 2,400 buses.
2,400. I thought we had 5,000.
No, we have 2,100 buses today.
Oh, I was off
by that time.
2,100 buses. Oh, 5,000 is GTA. Sorry, I mixed my numbers there. So if we're saving that much money, what do we do with that extra money?
I'll look to Josie to answer that question. I just bring the technology that brings those savings.
So through the chair, of course, there'll be some, well, we'll have savings in diesel fuel. We, would potentially have additional electricity costs for the charging station. So we'd have to first make sure that we fund that. And then any additional savings, we would recommend get reinvested in the system.
There are additional savings too, BEM, also on the operating side, because the diesel buses or the electric buses, their operating costs, like, if, I don't know, something in the engine busts in the diesel, same thing on the electrical side, it's not the same, right?
Yeah, through the chair. So the $60 million estimate is actually a net fuel savings. So after you pay the cost of electricity, we expect to save about $60 million per year once the fleet is electrified.
There's more though on the
but then in addition to that,
side,
there is a roughly 25% estimated savings on maintenance.
Which adds up to 25% of what?
I'd have to calculate that quickly here for you.
That's a big number, like.
Yeah, the fuel is the biggest number there, so it's maybe another 20% on top of that. So I'm, I don't want to guesstimate a number here, but it's in the range of $10 million. In addition to
let's say we're talking in the in multiples of 10 millions, right? So that money that we've saved comes out of operating. My thought is that it just goes, we don't really see that money doing anything else except going into that money not being spent from general revenues. Is that fair to say, Josie?
So we would identify a series of we would show it as a potential either capture of a reduction in the budget. We would show it as a reduction in a reinvestment because there are lots of places, for example, that we could contribute those funds, including, we have ongoing requirements that we'd like to fund through our operating budget to build up our fleet capacity through our, set up reserves that we don't have like the city does.
Yeah, so this is where I'd like to go. I mean, because we don't have an unlimited amount of money to buy as many electric buses as we'd like, and they're way more expensive. And we still have to, the other levels of government are generously paying for a portion of that new electric rolling stock. Why don't we? Is it possible to set up an arrangement where we quantify the savings and create a reserve fund from the money that we're not spending on that diesel fuel and we're not spending on the more expensive repairs, and create that reserve fund so we can start throwing money in that we could use specifically to buy more?
And through the chair, we could actually work on that proposal. We would need to get the city's approval, but yes, we could actually put that a proposal like that together.
Just to supplement through the chair, the funding application we're putting in through the Infrastructure Canada through Infrastructure Canada also assumes it's kind of a dual application. It's also to CIB, the Canadian Infrastructure Bank, who is offering a financing tool similar to what you're describing, where we look at they look at the forecast of all the savings over time, and they would essentially lend us capital at a very favorable rate based on the that projection of savings.
Okay, I can maybe do something maybe at a future meeting on that to maybe move a motion, or we could work on that, Ben.
Definitely.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you very much. Seeing no more questions, we're going to move to speakers. Who would like to speak on this item? Shelley or Commissioner Carroll, go ahead.
Thanks, Madam Speaker. Again, I'm not going to move any motions. There's great news in this budget. There are things that we wanted to do in the before times. We're still going to do them. Our funding hole is still there. The degree to which we can engage the other orders of government in funding our 25 billion in needs is a question mark there. But I asked my questions about the real estate strategy because I think it goes to transparency, Madam Chair. It may feel transparent because we're talking about them in the bubble, and we have access to staff, but it's a big piece we're moving here, and we've tacked it onto budget. And so, if the public wanted to comment on our overall real estate strategy, they probably were more concerned with, are there going to be enough buses? Have they got any money for subway cars yet? And in that way, they scan through. One thing, so that's on the downside of transparency. So I was really happy and relieved to hear that there is some flexibility, that it's the guideline we're looking at. And if we had to refine the policy going forward, item by item, project by project, the door wouldn't be shut on us. So that goes to yes on the yes side of transparency. But the other piece that is a big plus, I just want to applaud the TTC, because you have afforded us, Madam Speaker, and staff have afforded us the separation out of operating and capital so that we could deep dive into each and have rounds on each. That is a great big A+ in transparency, and it's a luxury we don't always have when we're meeting as council on the city's budget. And I think the questions that we all just asked, everyone included, are of such value. We just demonstrated that in terms of transparency, that one's huge, and it should be happening as a matter of course across all A, B, C's, and D's and council of the whole, because it is a huge load of information. Just Mr. Downey's little presentation alone on line 1 and 2, huge amount. I had to go back and read it 4 times. And it needs to be separated out from operating so we can give due attention to both. So on that piece, yes, we are more transparent. On moving some of these policy pieces, I think we really do have to give more meeting patience to them in our in-year meetings outside of the budget. Thanks. Those are my comments.
Thank you. And Commissioner Bradford, you're up.
Thanks very much, Madam Chair. And I'm going to start with a note of thanks to the TTC, to Rick, to the leadership team, Josie, everybody for this massive undertaking. That's our budget for 2022. I didn't speak on the operating side, but it goes for both of these pieces. And I do appreciate having it pulled out and presented that way, because it allows us an opportunity to do a deeper dive, as Councillor Carroll was speaking to there. This year, of course, really has been unprecedented, following an unprecedented experience before that. The world that we're living in is changing and evolving in really unpredictable ways. And here we are now in December, kind of looking down the horizon with less certainty than we had even a few months ago. But that taken in the context of capital planning, of course, we have to plan that's a blip on the horizon, and what we're experiencing today is not necessarily what we're going to be experiencing in the months and years ahead. And out talking to folks, out talking to Torontonians, out talking to transit riders, sometimes people call into question these investments in transit, the construction, particularly as we capital works are underway on a number of big projects across the city. And is this the time to be building transit? Is this the time to be making new vehicle purchases? And of course, we know here that the answer is yes. A lack of investment from other levels of government and a lack of ambition on the transit file for many, many years, far preceding the conversation that we're having today, has put us in the untenable situation where we do have challenges, with capacity. We do have challenges with service levels. We do have challenges moving people all day, all directions across the system and across the city. And so, I know in some respects we're feeling a bit of deja vu with the 2021 budget meeting, where we were also heading into a new wave of the pandemic. And I think it's going to continue to impact the transit system, as we've been discussing today, as we sort of try and calibrate and find what those new normals are. But again, I urge us as a board and as a commission, as a system, to recognize that the moment we are today, and in the months ahead, is not where we're going to be, in 5 years, in 10 years, in 15 years. And that's why these capital planning exercises are so important. There are some positives here for the year ahead, as we saw with our operating budget. The fact that we are keeping 2022 fares at 2020 rates, I think, provides some much needed affordability, predictability, consistency for our customers in very challenging times. And on this item, we're seeing that we continue to invest to improve the TTC as a system, advance that state of good repair work that is so important to the quality of the system, and adapt to meet the new ways that folks are moving around Toronto. So again, if you're out talking to riders, if you're out talking to our customers, it is clear the messages we get from them that we have a lot of work to do to improve those service levels, to improve the rider experience, to improve the interface between customer and system and city. But we are doing that work. And I think that it's often that backseat to operational discussion, the capital side of transit is the side that really plays an outsized role in the transit system that we're going to have in the future. So these are long-term, large-scale investments on this side of the budget. And when we drive the funds to improving the bones of our transit system, we're going to continue to see improvements on service levels, user experience, and reliability for our city. So I think the last thing, if I'm speaking on this or the previous item, as we've heard from our fellow commissioners, it's the importance of intergovernmental funding arrangements. They are essential, of course, to the support we need. And there's a lot of material in the decks presented today, good ammunition for us to take to our colleagues at other levels of government to make the case for the TTC, for those investments, for our regional connectivity, for the economy here in Toronto, and really what's at stake for the province and the country. So I'll wrap with a final note of thanks to our CEO, the senior leadership team, and all of the TTC workers across the entire system for continuing to keep the city moving. And, the pathway to maintain transit through these investments, through this planning work, it's very clear for us. And we just need to secure those investments, those dollars, and put those dollars to work. Thanks very much, Madam Chair.
Thank you. And I believe I'd like to speak as well. I'm not aware of anybody else who would like to speak, so I'll just forge ahead unless you throw up your hand. Okay. So I've got some motions, if they could put them up on the screen. I'm moving motions today, and it's a nice segue from what Commissioner Bradford just spoke about, asking the provincial and federal governments to work with the TTC to accelerate the adoption of new technologies that meet our shared environmental objectives, including fleet electrification. So we know about our 2040 goal. My motion asks the other levels of government to support the TTC's request for funding under the Federal Zero Emissions Transit Fund. This program provides an opportunity to access up to $350 million in federal funding over the next few years, and would support the TTC's requirement over the next 5 years to transition to, zero emissions, which is everybody's goal. The TTC has submitted an expression of interest to the Zero Emissions Transit Fund in order to seek 50% matching funds for up to 400 zero emissions buses and 513 charging stations. We can't forget about that infrastructure that's required. So full fleet electrification would reduce our city's GHG emissions by 250,000 tons of CO2. We've heard that before. And this is a major step in working towards cutting down Toronto's overall emissions. So we've got the largest e-bus fleet in North America. I can't say that enough. The largest in North America. The TTC is already leading the way, and I hope the TTC will continue to have intergovernmental support and collaboration on our ambitious sustainability initiatives and programs. I want to also just touch on the capital budget more broadly and thank our CEO, our CFO, the Director of Capital Accounting, Mark, for their hard work. I know that this must have been very challenging given all the challenges of this year to pull this all together and this amazing unfunded list of projects and an update on our budgets. It's incredible to see these significant investments in critical transit infrastructure upgrades and system-wide accessibility improvements, which I've moved motions on, and new vehicles. The 10-year capital budget in front of us will ensure that the TTC network is prepared to meet future demand for decades to come. So funding critical safety and state of good repair capital work ensures, quite frankly, reliability of our system, which is critical to the riders. This budget also reconfirms our commitment to full system accessibility by 2025, advancing delivery of our fleet procurement strategy with the purchase of 60 streetcars, 300 hybrid buses, 300 battery electric buses, and 70 Wheel-Trans vehicles. In addition to our ongoing transit expansion programs, we've heard today about Bloor Yonge, Line 1 and Line 2, and these are major capacity improvement projects, and of course, all our modernization initiatives. So today we have rare political consensus. It doesn't happen a lot, but everybody agrees transit plays a critical role in the recovery of COVID-19. Whether they're conservative or liberal or NDPs, everybody is lined up. And it's a rare day when you see this types of investments. And we made significant progress in securing funding to enhance subway capacity and procure the new vehicles, the electrification, and the much needed state of good repair. So I just want to emphasize that since the CIP's inception, which was an incredible initiative at the beginning of this term, we've secured funding for many of these projects that I've just listed, including Hillcrest facility, which I did not list. And this is very important, not the sexiest work, but important work. So while we don't have what the pandemic, we don't really know, we don't know what lies ahead for us in the next few weeks or months, we do know that the TTC will play a critical role in our city's recovery and future success. So I want to thank the entire TTC staff for their work on these budgets, for their work in 2021 through various obstacles. And I just want to take a moment to thank the board for another great year. We've met 4 times since November 5th. This is our 4th meeting, so it's been pretty exhaustive meeting schedule just recently, and I want to thank the board members for your commitment to this organization. So if we could now move the motion as amended, I would move the motion as amended with the recommendations I'm putting, or the motions I'm moving. So we'll move those first. All in favor? Opposed? That carries. And then as amended. The staff recommendations as amended. All those in favor? Opposed? That carries. And as of that, we are now adjourned for 2021. I want to wish everyone a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. Let's hope for a Happy New Year, please. And thanks to the board and to the TT staff once again. I hope everybody gets a bit of rest over the break. And thank you very much for a great meeting today. Lots of great questions and comments. Very important. Thank you.
Thanks, Madam
Bye,
Chair.
everyone.
Merry Christmas, Madam Chair.
Same to you.
Yeah. Happy holidays.